Lily wasn't breathing right. Ethan Walker knew it the way a father knows things he wishes he didn't, deep in his chest, before his mind could form the words. Her small body was pressed against his side, her weight heavier than it should have been for a child of 6, and every third breath she drew came out ragged and thin, like something inside her was slowly tearing loose. He had been counting those breaths for 2 days. He had not slept. He had not eaten. He had given her the last of the water 4 hours ago and watched her swallow it with eyes too dull to reflect the sky above them. He stopped walking. Right there on the broken dirt road outside Red Creek, Montana, in the dead heat of a July afternoon in 1891, Ethan Walker stopped walking and looked down at his daughter and felt the specific terror of a man who has already lost everything once and is now watching it happen again. "Lily." His voice came out rough. "Hey, look at me." She lifted her head. Her eyes found his, and she tried to smile the way she always did, that small, stubborn smile that reminded him so much of her mother, it sometimes made him turn away. "I'm okay, Papa." "I know you are," he said. "I know." He was lying. They both knew it. He picked her up, all 43 pounds of her, and held her against his chest, and kept walking. If you've ever found yourself watching this channel, if you've ever sat with your heart in your throat over a story that felt more real than the news, I want you to hit that subscribe button right now and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let me tell you what happened when Ethan Walker carried his sick little girl up to the gate of the Bennett Ranch and heard the most unexpected words a desperate man has ever been offered. Ethan had not always been this man. There was a version of him that existed before the funeral in the Colorado winter, before the job dried up, before the savings account hit 0 on a Tuesday morning, while Lily slept in the next room running a fever of 103. That version of Ethan Walker had a wife named Ruth, who laughed loud enough to embarrass him in church, and a small rented house with a leaking roof. He kept meaning to fix, and a steady job at the Hargrove cattle operation outside of Denver that paid enough, not well, but enough, and a daughter who was fat-cheeked and stubborn and slept with her arms thrown wide like she owned the whole bed. Ruth died in February. Pneumonia. 4 days from first cough to last breath. The doctor said it happened fast sometimes, especially in winter, especially when a body was already worn down. He said it like he was explaining weather. Ethan stood in the doorway of the bedroom where she lay and did not cry because Lily was behind him watching, and he had already decided in that first terrible second that he would not let his daughter see him break. He broke later alone in the barn with his face pressed against the neck of the old mare and his shoulders shaking so hard the horse shifted her feet and turned to look at him with those large, dark, patient eyes. He told no one. He packed the grief down into some place below his ribs where he figured it would stay, and he went back inside and told Lily that Mama had gone to be with God, which was what Ruth would have wanted him to say. And Lily had stared at him for a long moment with those serious gray eyes, and then said, "Will she be warm there?" And Ethan had said, "Yes, she'll be warm." And that was the last time either of them cried about Ruth out loud. The job lasted until April. Hargrove sold the operation to a land company out of Chicago that didn't need local hands. Ethan got 2 weeks' notice and 2 weeks' pay and a handshake from a man who didn't know his name. He spent the first week trying to find work in Denver. He spent the second week realizing there wasn't any. The city was full of men in the same position, good men, working men, men who knew cattle and horses and hard ground, all of them running up against the same locked doors. Lily got sick again in May. Different from what took Ruth, lower fever, longer duration. Something the doctor called a lung weakness that needed clean air and good food and rest. 3 things Ethan could not reliably provide in a rented room in Denver with $40 left to his name. "Take her somewhere dry," the doctor said. "Somewhere with space. Kids like her do better out of the city." "Where do you suggest?" Ethan asked. The doctor shrugged. That shrug cost Ethan something. He felt it like a door closing. He sold what he could. The furniture first, then Ruth's good china that she'd inherited from her mother and kept wrapped in cloth in the bottom of the wardrobe. He kept her wedding ring. He kept the photograph of the three of them taken the summer before Lily was born. Ruth, squinting into the sun and laughing at something just outside the frame. He kept a small wooden horse he'd carved for Lily when she was 2, before his hands got too calloused for fine work. Everything else went. He heard about Montana from a man at a livery in Colorado Springs. Said the land up there was still open, still hiring, still the kind of place where a man who worked hard could find a foothold. Where specifically? Ethan asked. Red Creek area. Ranches hiring through the summer. Big operations up that way. He had $17 and a sick little girl, and no better information than that. They took the train as far as the money allowed, which was not far enough, and walked the rest. 3 days on foot. Lily managed the first day all right. She was stubborn like her mother and didn't complain, just matched her small stride to his and asked questions about everything they passed, the color of a hawk, the name of a flower, whether clouds felt wet from the inside or dry. Ethan answered every question, because her voice was the only thing keeping him from the particular despair that comes from walking toward something uncertain, while everything certain is already gone. The second day, she started slowing. By the third day, he was carrying her. The Bennett Ranch appeared out of the heat haze like something he might have dreamed. Large and well-kept, the kind of spread that spoke of real money and real management fences, that held a barn that hadn't fallen cattle visible at distance in numbers that meant the operation was working. The main house was 2 stories white painted, with a porch that wrapped around the front, and a garden beside the east wall that somebody tended carefully. Ethan set Lily down at the gate. His arms were shaking. "Can you stand?" "Yes, Papa." She stood, though her legs trembled, and she held onto his shirt. He adjusted his hat, straightened as much as 3 days of walking would allow, tried to look like a man someone might hire rather than a man who was barely vertical. The gate was iron, well maintained. Beyond it, the road led up to the house. He rang the bell mounted on the post and waited. He heard footsteps on the porch before he saw her. Clara Bennett came down the front steps with the unhurried walk of a woman who owned the ground beneath her feet and knew it. She was 32 years old, though Ethan wouldn't have guessed her age from looking. She carried herself with a steadiness that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with the kind of experience that either breaks you or tempers you into something harder. She was a full-figured woman, broad-shouldered and deliberate in her movements, wearing a work dress that had seen real labor and the expression that gave nothing away for free. She stopped at the gate and looked at him. Then she looked at Lily. Ethan removed his hat. "Ma'am, my name is Ethan Walker. I'm a ranch hand experienced with cattle horses, fencing equipment maintenance, and general operations. I'm looking for work. I'll take whatever you're paying and I'll earn every cent of it." Clara said nothing. She was looking at Lily. Lily was looking back at her with those gray eyes that didn't miss much. She had pressed closer to Ethan's leg, but she wasn't hiding. She was watching the woman with the same careful attention she gave to everything new in the world. "How old is she?" Clara asked. 6. Her mother, Ethan kept his face even, passed in February, pneumonia. Clara's gaze moved back to him. Something shifted in it, but not pity. He'd had enough of pity to recognize the shape of it, and this wasn't that. This was something more careful. "You walked here," she said. It wasn't a question. 3 days. The silence stretched out between them. Behind Clara, the ranch house stood with its curtains closed against the afternoon heat. The garden beside it was in full summer bloom. Someone had planted lavender and something yellow he didn't know the name of along the fence line. "I've got 3 experienced hands already," Clara said finally. Ethan's jaw tightened. "I'll work for less, ma'am. I'm not asking for—" "That's not what I said." He stopped. Clara opened the gate. She stepped to the side to let them through, then walked back up the path toward the house without looking back to see if they followed. Ethan looked down at Lily. Lily looked up at him. "Are we going in?" she whispered. "I think so," he said. They followed Clara Bennett through the gate and up to the porch where she stopped and turned and faced them with the afternoon light behind her. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the chairs on the porch. Ethan sat. Lily climbed into his lap without being asked, which she'd been doing since February, whenever she was unsure of a situation. He put one arm around her automatically. Clara disappeared inside and came back with 2 glasses of water and a small plate of bread and cold meat, which she set on the table between the chairs without comment. Lily looked at the food and then looked at Ethan. "Go on," he said quietly. She ate with the focused determination of a child who had been hungry long enough to stop being embarrassed about it. Ethan drank the water and held himself still and watched Clara, who had taken the remaining chair and was watching them both with that expression that gave nothing away. "Where are you from?" she asked. "Colorado, outside Denver originally. Worked Hargrove's operation for 4 years until they sold." "References. I can get them. Takes time I don't have right now." Clara nodded slowly. "How bad is she?" She was looking at Lily. "Doctor says lung weakness. Needs clean air and consistent food." Ethan paused. "She's tougher than she looks." "She looks tough enough," Clara said. Lily, who had been eating and apparently not listening, said without looking up, "I walked the whole first day by myself." Clara looked at her. "Did you?" she said. "My feet hurt." Lily finally looked up. "But I didn't say so." Something moved through Clara Bennett's face, then fast, like a shadow crossing and gone before Ethan could read it clearly. But it changed the set of her mouth, made her look for just a moment less like a woman who had built walls, and more like a woman who remembered what the world felt like before she built them. "I believe you," Clara said. Lily went back to eating. Clara was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had shifted, same measured tone, but underneath it something that cost her to say. "Mr. Walker, I'm going to be direct with you because I don't have patience for anything else. Ma'am, I have more ranch hands than I need. What I'm short on isn't labor." Ethan waited. "I need someone who's going to be here past the season. Someone reliable. Someone who'll take this operation seriously because they have a reason to, not just because they're passing through." "I'm not passing through," Ethan said. "I don't have anywhere to pass through to." "I know that," Clara said. "I can see that." He wasn't sure if that was meant to sting. If it was, she'd aimed well. "What I'm proposing," Clara continued, "is not a standard arrangement." "All right." She folded her hands in her lap, looked at them for a moment before looking back at him. "I was married for 6 years. My husband passed 4 years ago. We had plans for this ranch and plans for a family, and the ranch is still here, but the family didn't happen." She said it flatly, the way you say something you've had to accept so many times it no longer has sharp edges. "I'm 32 years old, and this house has got 8 rooms, and I eat alone every night." Ethan said nothing. There wasn't anything to say. "I'm not talking about charity," Clara said, and the word came out with heat behind it, like she was cutting it off before he could reach for it. "I'm talking about an arrangement that gives both parties something they need." "What kind of arrangement?" Clara looked at Lily. Lily had finished eating and was sitting quietly watching the garden, one small hand still holding the edge of the plate. "I want to be part of that child's life," Clara said. "Not instead of you, alongside you. I want her to have a home in this house, a room of her own, proper meals, schooling. I want to teach her things. I want—" She stopped, started again. "I want to come home to something besides the sound of this house being empty." Ethan's throat tightened. He looked at his daughter. Lily had turned from the garden and was watching Clara now with those serious gray eyes. "And what do I do?" Ethan asked. "You run this ranch," Clara said. "You work it properly, you manage the hands, you make decisions alongside me. You live here. You eat here." She paused. "You raise your daughter here." The air between them felt very still. "You don't know me," Ethan said. "No," Clara agreed. "I don't. I could be anybody." "You could be," she said, "but you're not. A man who carries a sick child 3 days on foot to find her honest work and clean air is not somebody I need to know much more about." Ethan set his jaw. And if it doesn't work, if it's too strange, too complicated, if people talk, people already talk, Clara said. I've been running a ranch alone for 4 years. People have been talking since the day James was buried. Something flickered in her eyes. I've stopped caring what they say. He looked at her for a long moment. She looked back, and she didn't flinch, and she didn't soften, and she didn't reach for him with any of the tools people sometimes use when they want something. No flattery, no performance of neediness, no manufactured warmth. Just the flat, clear truth of what she was offering and what she was asking for. Papa. Lily's voice was small, but very certain. He looked down at her. I like it here, Lily said. Can we stay? It was that simple for her. 6 years old and 3 days without a real bed, and a woman who had given her bread and water and said, I believe you, and that was enough. Children move toward warmth the way plants move toward light, without argument, without complicated reasoning, purely because it is there. Ethan Walker had been making decisions alone for 5 months. Every single one of those decisions had been about survival, not his survival, Lily's. Every choice he'd made since February had been measured against one question. Does this keep her alive? Does this keep her fed? Does this keep her safe? He looked at his daughter, sitting on the porch of the Bennett Ranch in the Montana afternoon, with breadcrumbs on her chin, and her eyes bright for the first time in 3 days. Then he looked at Clara Bennett, who was watching him with the expression of a woman who has asked for something she needs badly and is too proud to beg and too honest to pretend she doesn't want it. We'd have separate quarters, he said. There's a foreman's cottage on the east side of the property, Clara said immediately. It's yours, private, your own space. Lily sleeps there with me unless she chooses otherwise. Of course, and this is a work arrangement first. Whatever else it is, whatever it might become, that's secondary. I'm here to work. Understood, Clara said. Though I'd say we're both here for more than that. He was quiet. One more thing, he said. Ask it. You said you want to be part of her life. He kept his eyes on Clara's face. She's already lost one person who was her whole world. You come into this, you come in serious. You don't do it halfway, and you don't walk away when it gets complicated. Because if you do... He stopped. His voice had gone rough, and he didn't hide it. If you do, I will not forgive it. The weight of that landed between them and stayed. Clara held his gaze. Mr. Walker, she said quietly. The last person I loved, I watched die in that house in there over the course of 11 days. And I sat with him every one of those days, and I held his hand at the end, and when it was over, I didn't leave. I stayed. I built this operation from 50 head of cattle, and a mortgage that should have buried me. She paused. I don't do anything halfway, and I don't walk away. Ethan believed her. He didn't know why exactly. She was a stranger. Everything in him had been calibrated toward caution for 5 months, toward the careful preservation of what little he had left. But there was something in the way she said it, not with emotion, not with drama, just with the simple weight of a person stating a fact about themselves that they'd learned the hard way. He put his hat back on. All right then, he said. Clara stood. She looked at Lily. Would you like to see the house? She asked. Lily slid off Ethan's lap and took 2 steps toward Clara, then stopped and looked back at her father. Go on, he said. Same words as before when he'd told her to eat. She understood them the same way. She took 2 more steps and stopped again. Then she reached up and took Clara's hand. Clara went very still for just a moment, a fraction of a second, barely visible, the way a person goes still when something touches them that they've been bracing themselves not to feel. Then she closed her hand around Lily's. Come on then, she said. I'll show you the kitchen first. There's apple pie. Real apple pie? Lily asked, very serious about this. Made it this morning. They went inside. Ethan Walker sat alone on the porch of the Bennett Ranch and listened to his daughter's footsteps moving through the house, small and quick. Curious, moving toward something, and he put his face in his hands and let himself feel just for one unguarded minute. The impossible complicated mix of grief and relief and terror, and something that might have been the very distant, very tentative first note of hope. Then he put his hands down, straightened his hat, and went to find the foreman's cottage. He had a job to start in the morning. That first week was careful on all sides. Ethan reported to the main barn at first light each morning and assessed what he'd walked into. The operation was larger than he'd initially read, better than 200 head of Hereford cattle, 12 working horses, a chicken operation that Clara ran mostly out of stubbornness, from what he could tell a hay barn that needed shoring up on the east wall, and 3 ranch hands who looked at Ethan with the particular wariness of men who have been running things their own way and are now watching a new variable appear. Their names were Boyd Hector and a kid everyone called Pinto, who couldn't have been more than 19. Boyd was the problem one. Ethan recognized the type in the first handshake, big man confident in the slow, deliberate way that sometimes came from genuine capability and sometimes from never having been challenged hard enough. Boyd looked at Ethan's worn boots and his second-hand jacket and made a calculation that Ethan could see happening in real time. "So you're the new foreman," Boyd said. "I'm the new foreman," Ethan agreed. "How long you been working cattle?" 12 years. Boyd worked his jaw. "Miss Clara set this up herself." "She did." "She tell you about how we do things?" "She told me enough. I'll figure out the rest." Boyd nodded slowly, the way men nod when they're not agreeing, just deciding what to do next. Hector was older and said almost nothing and watched Ethan, the way good ranch hands watch new management, not hostile, not friendly, just measuring competence. Pinto was young enough to not have a position yet and defaulted to enthusiastic, which Ethan appreciated. By the end of the second day, he'd identified 3 things that needed immediate attention. The hay barn wall, a section of north fence that had 6 posts ready to fail, and a rotation schedule for the cattle that wasn't moving them off the south pasture fast enough. He wrote up what he needed in terms of materials and labor, and brought it to Clara at the end of the week. She read through it at the kitchen table, while Lily sat across from her, learning to hold a pen properly, which Clara had apparently taken on as a personal project. "Your letters are leaning," Clara said to Lily without looking up from Ethan's list. "Which way?" Lily asked. "Right. Letters should stand straight." Lily made a sound of effort and tried again. Clara set down the list. "This is thorough." "Some of it should have been addressed 2 months ago," Ethan said. "My last foreman left in March," Clara said. "I've been managing what I could." "You managed it well for what you had." She looked up at him. "That's not flattery," he said. "That's assessment. You kept the herd in reasonable condition with 3 men and no foreman. That's competent ranching." Clara held his gaze for a moment. "Thank you," she said. And she meant it. He could tell, not because she needed the praise, but because she recognized the difference between empty compliment and honest observation, and the second kind mattered to her. "My letters are straight," Lily announced. Clara looked over. "Almost," she said. "The E is still leaning." Lily made the sound again. Ethan watched the 2 of them, the woman at the table with his daughter, and felt again that complicated internal thing he didn't have words for yet. He looked away. "I'll need your approval on the lumber order," he said. "You have it," Clara said, still watching Lily's letters. "Order what you need." He ordered what he needed. The hay barn wall was done by the 2nd week, the north fence posts by the 3rd. Boyd came around during the 4th week the way capable men do when they've seen enough competent work to revise their initial assessment. Not with an apology, because men like Boyd don't do apologies, but with a different quality of cooperation, a shift from studied indifference to something closer to professional engagement. "You fixed that fence section faster than I expected," Boyd said one afternoon, which coming from Boyd was approximately the highest possible praise. "Good help," Ethan said, nodding at Hector and Pinto. Boyd considered this. "We'll be starting the late summer rotation soon. I can show you how Miss Clara likes it done." "Appreciate it," Ethan said. It was an offering of a kind, and Ethan took it without making too much of it, and after that, the dynamic among the four of them settled into something functional. Inside the house, things were their own kind of careful. Clara kept her word about Lily in ways that Ethan had half expected to be theoretical and turned out to be entirely literal. The east bedroom became Lily's room, properly set up with a real bed and a quilt, and a small bookshelf that Clara had populated with a careful selection of books she'd apparently bought in town, before Ethan had even made a decision about staying. He didn't ask when she'd bought them. The timing said enough. There were lessons every afternoon. Reading first, then arithmetic, then on days when the weather was good things, Clara taught outside. She showed Lily the garden, taught her which plants needed water and which didn't, how to read the sky for afternoon storms, how to tell a sick plant from a healthy one. Lily absorbed all of it with the focused intensity she applied to everything and asked enough questions to make Clara laugh, which was a sound Ethan heard coming through the windows sometimes when he was returning from the fields, and which had a quality to it he hadn't expected lighter than her speaking voice unguarded real. He didn't make anything of it. He had a job. He did the job. In the evenings, he ate dinner at the main house because Clara had established that as part of the arrangement, and because Lily wanted both of them at the table, and the three of them sat together and talked about the day's work, and Lily's lessons, and whatever small news came from town, and it felt Ethan didn't let himself finish that thought most nights. He went back to the cottage and went to sleep and started again in the morning. The 5th week, Lily got sick again. Not badly, not what it had been on the road, but enough. A fever that started Tuesday night and climbed through Wednesday, and had her sweating and miserable and too hot to sleep. Ethan sat with her through the night, the way he always did, wet cloth on her forehead, watching the rise and fall of her chest, counting breaths. Clara appeared at the cottage door at 2 in the morning. He didn't ask how she knew. She came in without ceremony, set down a pot of something on the small stove, and knelt beside the bed to look at Lily. "Fever's down from what it was," Ethan said. "I know." Clara touched Lily's forehead with the back of her hand. Lily stirred, but didn't wake. "I made a broth, garlic and onion and dried sage. My mother used to make it." "You didn't have to." "I know I didn't have to," she said in a tone that cut the sentence off cleanly without being unkind. She was looking at Lily. "She was asking for you in her sleep, about an hour ago. I could hear her from the house." Ethan hadn't known that. Something in his chest shifted in a way that made him need to look elsewhere for a moment. "Thank you," he said. "Don't," Clara said, and her voice had gone quieter. "You don't have to thank me for this." "I do, though." "No." She was still looking at Lily, and in the lamplight, her expression was open in a way Ethan hadn't seen it during daylight hours, like the dark had removed something she usually kept in place. "I'd be up either way. I always hear this house at night, every creak, every sound." She paused. "It's different having something to get up for." He didn't say anything. She didn't say anything. After a while, she ladled broth into a small cup and set it by the bed. For when Lily woke up, then stood and straightened her shoulders, and became again the woman who owned the ground beneath her feet. "I'll check in the morning," she said. "Clara." He said her name before he thought about it. She paused in the doorway. "Thank you," he said again. Because there was no other word for what she'd done for what she kept doing, and he was not the kind of man who left things like that unsaid. She looked at him for a moment. "Get some sleep," she said. "She'll be better by morning." She was. By the time the summer edged toward August and the Montana heat began to think about breaking. Ethan Walker had been at the Bennett Ranch for 6 weeks, and the thing that had been forming in the space between 3 people was no longer something he could avoid naming, at least to himself. It wasn't love. Or it wasn't only that, or it wasn't that yet, or he hadn't looked at it long enough to know what it was. But it was something. Something real and steady, and increasingly difficult to imagine being without. One evening after dinner, after Lily had fallen asleep in her room, the words still had a particular weight. Ethan and Clara sat on the front porch as the sun went down behind the western ridge, and the ranch settled into the particular quiet of a place that has been worked hard and is resting. "You know what the town's saying," Ethan said. It wasn't a question. He'd heard it from Pinto, who'd heard it in Red Creek, various versions of various questions about what exactly was happening at the Bennett Ranch and what exactly Clara was thinking taking in a drifter and his kid. "I know," Clara said. She was watching the sky. "Does it bother you?" She thought about it honestly, which he'd come to understand was what she did. She didn't answer fast, she actually thought. "No," she said finally. "What bothers me is that it might bother you, or affect Lily. Lily doesn't know." "She will." Ethan was quiet. "Kids know more than we think," Clara said. "She already knows some of what people say about me. She asked me last week why Mrs. Harlan at the feed store is always so careful when she talks to me." He looked over. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that some people get very comfortable with the way things are, and when things change, it makes them uneasy, and that unease comes out sideways sometimes." Ethan almost smiled. "That's a complicated answer for a 6-year-old. She's a complicated 6-year-old. He couldn't argue that. The sky went from orange to deep red to the early purple of dusk, and across the fields the cattle moved in slow, dark shapes, and somewhere in the barn one of the horses made a low sound of settling. "She told me something this morning," Clara said. "Lily, Clara turned her cup in her hands. "She said she's decided to call me Clara because she already has a mama, and it would be wrong to have two, but that she thinks Clara is a very nice name and she hopes I don't mind." Ethan's throat tightened. "She worked that out herself." "She said she'd been thinking about it for a while." A pause. "She said she thinks her mama would like you to not be sad all the time, and she thinks her mama would probably like me too, because I let her eat pie for breakfast twice." The tightness in his throat moved somewhere lower and became harder to hold down. "I'm not sad all the time," he said. "I know," Clara said. "But you were, when you came." He looked at her. She looked back. "You're different now," she said. "Even the men have noticed. Boyd told Hector you're the best foreman he's worked under, which from Boyd is essentially a declaration of undying loyalty." Ethan surprised himself by laughing. Actually laughing, it came out short and rough but real, and Clara smiled at the sound of it, and the evening air around them felt lighter for a moment. "She's incredible," he said. He wasn't sure which of them he meant. Both, maybe. Clara looked back at the horizon. "Yes," she said quietly. "She is." And then, because he was an honest man, and she was a person who deserved honesty, and the evening had somehow made it easier to say things plainly. "So are you," Ethan said. Clara didn't answer, but she didn't look away, and in the fading light, her expression held something unguarded and a little afraid and a little glad, and Ethan thought that for now, that was more than enough. The trouble started on a Tuesday. Ethan was in the north pasture when Pinto rode out hard to find him standing in his stirrups before the horse even stopped. "Mr. Walker, there's a man at the gate." "What kind of man?" "Lawman kind. Sheriff Grady from town. Says he needs to speak to you." Pinto hesitated. He brought 2 deputies. Ethan handed his work gloves to Hector without a word and rode back. Thomas Grady was exactly what a man named Thomas Grady in a county like Red Creek was likely to be. Large, deliberate, practiced in the performance of authority, with a badge that caught the light and eyes that watched for the effect that light had on other people. He was standing outside the main gate, with his 2 deputies positioned slightly behind and to either side, which was a particular arrangement that meant something. "Ethan Walker," Grady said. "Sheriff?" Ethan swung down from the horse. "What can I do for you?" "Been a message come up from Colorado," Grady said. "From the Denver Marshal's office." Ethan kept his face neutral. "All right. They're looking for a man by the name of Ethan Walker, former ranch hand out of the Hargrove operation." Grady's eyes hadn't moved from Ethan's face. "Accused of taking money from the ranch accounts before the sale went through. About $800. The words landed with the particular quality of wrongness. Ethan stared at Grady. "That's not right," he said. "May not be. But the accusation's there, and the name matches, and the description matches closely enough that I've got an obligation. I never took a cent from Hargrove. I left with 2 weeks' pay and a handshake from a man who didn't know my name. I believe you may believe that," Grady said in the careful tone of a man who has learned to say things that sound fair without committing to anything. "Who made the accusation?" Grady was quiet for a beat too long. "Sheriff," Ethan said again, and there was something different in his voice now. "Who filed it?" "A man named Cassidy, Raymond Cassidy. Says he handled accounts for the land company that bought Hargrove's operation." The name meant nothing to Ethan, but the shape of it, a land company, an accountant, money that disappeared. A name that matched closely enough was a shape he'd seen before in other men's stories. Someone needed a name to put to a theft, and he'd been the easiest available name. He was reaching for words when he heard the front door of the house. Clara walked off the porch and down the path to the gate with the same unhurried deliberateness she brought to everything and stood beside Ethan facing Grady across the iron rail. "Sheriff," she said. "Miss Bennett? What's the charge?" "Accusation of theft. Out of Colorado." "Accusation?" she repeated. "Not a warrant." Grady's jaw shifted. "Not a warrant yet, but then you're here informally." "I'm here because a message came, and I've got a duty to." "You've got a duty to the law," Clara said. "And the law requires a warrant, Thomas. You've known that since before you pinned that badge on." She turned to look at Ethan. "Don't say anything else to him." Ethan looked at her. "Not because you have anything to hide," she said, and her voice was steady and clear. "But because you don't have to say anything until this is done properly." Grady's expression hardened. "Miss Bennett, I'd advise you not to." "I own this property," Clara said, turning back to him. "Every inch of ground you're standing near belongs to Bennett Ranch. And until you come back with a proper warrant, Ethan Walker works for me and lives on my land, and that's where this conversation ends." The deputy on the left shifted his weight. Grady looked at Ethan. "This isn't finished." "No," Ethan said. "I don't imagine it is." Grady nodded once, the nod of a man storing something for later, and turned and walked back to his horse. Clara watched them ride away. Then she turned to Ethan. "Tell me everything," she said. "From the beginning. Every detail about Hargrove and how you left and who saw you go." Ethan told her. She listened without interrupting, which was something she was very good at, the kind of listening that wasn't waiting for its turn to speak, but actually following every word. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Raymond Cassidy," she said. "I know that name." Ethan stilled. "How?" "He was in Red Creek 3 weeks ago, meeting with Judge Alcott and a man from the land company." She said it slowly, like she was watching the pieces fall into place. "There were rumors about some of the land purchases up here, that the documentation wasn't clean on a couple of the smaller ranch sales, that someone was moving money around in ways that didn't match the records." Ethan stared at her. "Someone needed a name," he said. "Someone needed a name." Clara agreed, and her eyes were hard and very clear. "And yours was available." He felt the cold of it, not fear exactly, but the particular chill of understanding how a person can be dismantled by paperwork and distance, how a lie told far enough away can move faster than the truth. "Clara." His voice came out very even. "If they come back with a warrant—" "They won't," she said. "Not if we move faster than they do." He looked at her. She looked back at him the way she'd looked at him that first afternoon, flat and clear and without flinching. "I have a lawyer in Helena," she said. "I'm writing to him tonight, and I know 2 men in Denver who knew James, good men with connections to the marshal's office there. I'll write to them too." "That takes time." "Then we'll use the time well." From behind them, from the direction of the house, came Lily's voice. "Papa?" They both turned. Lily was standing at the edge of the porch watching them with her serious gray eyes. "Is something wrong?" she asked. Ethan walked to the porch and crouched down to her level. "There's a misunderstanding," he said, "about some things that happened before we came here. We're going to fix it." Lily studied his face. "Are you scared?" she asked. He held her gaze. "A little," he said, because he didn't lie to her. "But Clara's going to help us figure it out." Lily looked past him at Clara. Clara met the child's eyes steadily. "It'll be all right," Clara said. "I promise." Lily considered this with the gravity she brought to all important things. Then she nodded once. "Okay," she said. "I'm going back inside. Clara said I could practice my letters until supper." She went back inside. Ethan stood. He turned to find Clara already looking at him. "Come inside," she said. "I'll make coffee. We need to plan." He followed her up the porch steps and through the door of the Bennett ranch house, and as he crossed the threshold, he thought that whatever came next, whatever Grady brought back, whatever Raymond Cassidy had set in motion, whatever machinery had been pointed in his direction from Denver, he was not going to face it the way he'd faced everything since February. He was not going to face it alone. Clara wrote 3 letters that night. Ethan knew because he couldn't sleep, and the light in the main house stayed on past midnight, and when he walked to the cottage window, he could see the faint glow from her study cutting across the dark yard. He stood there longer than he meant to, watching that light, and something in his chest did a thing he didn't have language for yet. He went back to bed. Didn't sleep. By morning, she had the letters sealed and addressed and sent Pinto into Red Creek on the first horse out with instructions to post them at the telegraph office, not the General Mail Telegraph, because she wanted them in Helena and Denver before the week was out. She told Ethan this over breakfast, matter-of-factly, the way she told him everything like the decisions had already been made, and the only thing left was execution. "My lawyer's name is Arthur Penn," she said. "He handled the estate when James passed. He's thorough, and he doesn't rattle easily, which is what we need." "What do you need from me?" Ethan asked. "Names. Everyone who saw you at Hargrove's operation in the months before the sale. Anyone who can confirm you were there working honest. Form in other hands anyone who knew you." Ethan thought. "There was a man named Cole Briggs. Senior hand worked Hargrove's for 11 years. He'd know. Write it down. Every name you can think of." He wrote them down. 7 names. Men he'd worked beside, eaten lunch with, helped through calving season and fence repairs, and the particular miserable camaraderie of men doing hard work in bad weather. He wrote their names and what he knew of where they'd scattered after the sale, and he handed the list to Clara, and she read it with the focused attention she brought to everything and added it to the folder she was building. That folder grew fast. She was methodical in a way that surprised him, not because he'd underestimated her, but because he hadn't known this version of her existed. The Clara who ran the ranch was formidable. The Clara who was dismantling a false accusation was something beyond that. She had a way of moving through information like she was taking apart a machine, identifying each piece, understanding how it connected to the next setting, aside what wasn't useful and bearing down on what was. "You said Cassidy was meeting with Judge Alcott," Ethan said one evening 3 days after Grady's visit. 3 weeks ago. I heard it from Margaret Fowler at the dry goods store. She said Cassidy was in town 2 days, met with Alcott both afternoons." "What's Alcott's involvement?" Clara set down her pen. "Judge Alcott handles property disputes in this county, has for 12 years. He's also very comfortable with certain land companies, comfortable in the way that comes from arrangements that don't get put in writing." Ethan stared at her. "You think the judge is part of it?" "I think the judge knows more than he should about things that have gone sideways in this county's land records," she said carefully. "I've thought that for 2 years. I haven't had cause to press it." She looked at him. "I may have cause now." The shape of it was getting larger. What had looked like a targeted accusation against one man was starting to show its actual dimensions, something broader. Something that had been operating in this county for longer than Ethan had been here, and he'd walked into the edge of it without knowing the machine existed. "Clara," he said, "if this is bigger than what happened to me." "It is," she said flatly. "Then pushing on it is exactly what we're going to do," she said, and her voice had the quality of a door closing, not against him toward the thing in front of them. "Because Cassidy used your name, Ethan, and that means we have standing, and I intend to use it." He looked at her. "I don't want you to take risks on my account." She looked back at him with an expression that was almost impatient. "You are not on your account," she said. "You're on mine. Both of you are." She held his gaze. "That's not charity. That's what I told you this was going to be." He didn't have an answer for that. He didn't need one. Boyd noticed something was off before Ethan said a word about it. That was the thing about Boyd, under the deliberate exterior, was a man who paid attention, who read the temperature of a situation, the way good ranch hands read weather. He came to Ethan on the fourth morning after Grady's visit and said very simply, "If you need men to vouch for your character in town, me and Hector will go." Ethan looked at him. "You don't know what the situation is," he said. "I know you've been here 6 weeks," Boyd said. "I know how a man works when he's got something to hide, and I know how a man works when he doesn't. You work like you don't." He shrugged, which on Boyd was approximately a speech. "We'll go if you need us." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "I appreciate it," he said. Boyd nodded once and went back to the horses. Pinto, who had been pretending not to listen from the other side of the fence, said, "Me too, Mr. Walker, if it helps." "I know, Pinto." "I can be very convincing," Pinto said seriously. "I don't doubt it." In town, things were moving. Ethan heard about it in pieces from Pinto, who was 19 and constitutionally incapable of not talking, and from Clara, who had sources in Red Creek that he was slowly beginning to understand, were more extensive than she'd initially indicated. The general shape of town opinion was complicated. There were people who believed the accusation straightforwardly because he was a stranger, because strangers were easy to believe the worst of, because a man who appeared out of nowhere with a sick child and moved into a wealthy widow's ranch was already a suspicious figure in certain imaginations. There were people who believed Clara's implicit endorsement of Ethan and therefore defaulted to skepticism about the accusation. And there was a third group, smaller, quieter, who had questions about Cassidy and Alcott and the land deals that had gone through this county in the last 3 years, and thought Ethan Walker's situation might be the thing that finally pulled the thread. Margaret Fowler was in the third group. Clara told him about her on a Wednesday evening. Margaret Fowler ran the dry goods store with her husband and had lived in Red Creek for 30 years and knew everything about everyone in the county, which made her either an asset or a liability, depending on which side of a situation you were on. "She came to see me," Clara said. Ethan looked up. "Here, this afternoon while you were in the North Pasture. She says she overheard Cassidy's second meeting with Alcott." Clara's voice was very level. "She wasn't supposed to overhear it. She was in the back room taking inventory, and they were in the front, and she said Cassidy didn't know she was there." "What did she hear?" "Cassidy needed a name attached to the missing Hargrove money. The actual man who took it, she says Cassidy referenced him, but not by name, just said our man in Denver had already moved the funds and was long gone. The accusation needed to land somewhere else while the real trail went cold." The cold moved through Ethan's chest again. "He chose me because my name was in the Hargrove employment records," he said. "Your name was there, your description was close enough, and you'd left the state, which made you difficult to reach and easier to accuse." Clara's jaw was set. "Margaret's willing to give a statement. She's been watching what Cassidy and Alcott have been doing to land ownership in this county for 2 years, and she's angry enough about it to put her name on paper." "Is she safe?" Ethan asked. Clara looked at him. "I mean it," he said. "If she testifies—" "She's thought about that," Clara said. "She said she's 63 years old, and she's watched 3 families lose their land to manipulated paperwork, and she is not going to spend the rest of her life watching it happen and doing nothing." He believed it. He'd never met Margaret Fowler, but he believed it. "Arthur Penn writes back by Friday," Clara said. "He'll know what to do with her statement." Friday came, and Penn's reply came with it, a long letter, close written, that Clara read twice before handing to Ethan. Penn's assessment was sharp and fast. The accusation was thin, dependent on circumstantial name matching and distance, and would collapse quickly against a credible character witness and a solid counter-narrative. More importantly, Penn had contacts in the Denver Marshal's office and was going to make inquiries about Raymond Cassidy's history there. He thought there was more to find. There was more to find. It took 11 more days. Those 11 days had their own particular quality. The tense, suspended time of waiting for something to break when every ordinary moment has an edge to it. Ethan worked. He worked harder than he had any of the previous weeks, because work was the thing he knew how to do when everything else was uncertain, and the ranch needed the work, and Boyd and Hector and Pinto needed direction, and the cattle needed rotating, and the broken equipment in the south barn needed 2 men and a full afternoon to sort out. He worked until his hands ached, and his back told him things he didn't want to hear, and then he came in for dinner, and sat at Clara's table, and ate food she'd made or supervised the making of, and watched Lily recite her letters, which were no longer leaning, and held himself together. Lily knew something was happening. She was too perceptive not to know, and too smart to pretend she didn't. She didn't ask directly again. After the one conversation on the porch, she seemed to have filed it under things being handled by adults she trusted, which was its own particular thing for Ethan to hold, that she trusted Clara enough to file her there. But she watched them more carefully than usual. One night she climbed into Ethan's lap after dinner. She did this less than she used to. 6-year-old dignity asserting itself, but sometimes still, and leaned against his chest, and said to Clara, who was across the table with her coffee, "My papa doesn't worry about things he can fix." Clara looked at her. "That's wise," she said. "He told me that," Lily said. "After Mama died, he said some things can't be fixed so there's no use worrying about them, and some things can be fixed so you just fix them." "What does he do about the things that can't be fixed?" Clara asked. Lily thought about this. "He goes to the barn," she said. Ethan made a sound in his throat. Clara looked at him over Lily's head. Something moved in her eyes, something that understood the weight of what a barn at 2 a.m. means to a man who can't let his daughter see him break. She didn't say anything, but she held his gaze, and that was enough. The wire from Penn came on the 17th day. Ethan was in the barn when Clara came in with it. She walked straight to him, didn't call from the door, didn't wait, walked in and held out the paper. He read it. Raymond Cassidy had a history. 2 prior incidents in different counties, both involving land company accounting irregularities, both resulting in false accusations against departing employees whose names appeared in employment records. He had been investigated once in Kansas. The investigation dropped due to what Penn described carefully as administrative pressure. He was, in Penn's legal language, a known instrument of fraudulent asset concealment. More than that, the Denver Marshal's office had already been looking for him in connection with the Hargrove money. They had their own leads. They had, in fact, already identified the actual thief, a man named Holt, who had worked in the Chicago Land Company's accounts office and was currently in custody in Cheyenne. The accusation against Ethan Walker was already collapsing under its own weight in Denver. Penn was filing formal documentation to have it cleared. He expected it done within a week. Ethan read the wire twice. He stood in the barn with the paper in his hands, and Boyd and Hector pretending very hard to be occupied with other things at the far end, and the mare in the nearest stall shifting her weight and regarding him with those patient dark eyes. He didn't cry. He thought about crying. Felt the pressure of it somewhere behind his eyes, that specific built-up weight of 11 days of contained fear and 5 months of hard road, and longer than that of carrying things alone. He breathed through it. Then he looked up at Clara. She was watching him with an expression he'd never seen on her before. Open, careful, something almost afraid in it, like she was waiting to see what he'd do with the news. "It's done," he said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. "Nearly done," she said. "Penn says 1 week." He nodded. "Ethan." Her voice was quiet. He looked at her. "You can let it out," she said. "If you need to. Nobody here's going to think less of you." He breathed. Boyd and Hector were very, very occupied with those other things at the far end of the barn. "I'm fine," he said. Clara looked at him. "I'll be fine," he said, which was different, and she heard the difference, and she nodded once. "Come inside when you're ready," she said. "I'll tell Lily." She left. He stood in the barn another 10 minutes with the mare and the paper, and the weight of relief, which it turned out was its own kind of heavier sometimes than the fear it replaced. Because fear keeps you braced, and relief asks you to let the bracing go. And when you've been braced for long enough, that's harder than it sounds. Then he put his hat on and went inside. Lily already knew when he came through the door. Clara must have told her in the kitchen because when Ethan walked in, Lily turned from the counter and looked at him with those gray eyes that never missed anything and said very simply, "Clara said it's okay now." "It's going to be okay," he said. "That's what I said," Lily said with the particular authority of a child correcting an adult on a technicality. Something loosened in him. Something that had been wound tight for 17 days, for 5 months, for longer than that. And he reached down and picked her up and held her the way he had on the road, both arms, her weight real and warm and certain against his chest. She put her arms around his neck. "I knew it would be okay," she said into his shoulder. Clara promised. He looked across the kitchen at Clara, who was standing by the stove with a coffee cup in her hand and that open, careful expression on her face watching them. "Yeah," he said. "She did." The news reached town before the week was out. Penn's filing moved fast, and the Denver Marshal's documentation moved with it. And within days, the story that had been circling Red Creek in whisper form became something else. Something louder with different edges. The real version. The version where Raymond Cassidy had used a departing ranch hand's name to paper over a theft committed by a land company accountant, and where the judge who'd been meeting with Cassidy had questions to answer about his role in 3 years of questionable land transfers in the county. That last part was what changed the texture of things, because it turned out Ethan wasn't the only person Cassidy had wronged, wasn't the only name used, wasn't the only piece in a larger machine. There were families who'd lost landmen who'd lost work paperwork that didn't match what people remembered signing. And once Penn started pulling the thread, and the Denver Marshal started pulling the thread from the other end, and Margaret Fowler put her name on a document and handed it to the right people. The thread came loose faster than anyone had expected. Judge Alcott resigned on a Thursday. Ethan heard about it from Boyd, who heard it from Pinto, who had been in town for supplies and apparently spent more time at the feed store hearing things than he did actually getting supplies. "The judge is gone," Boyd said. Ethan looked up from the fence post he was setting. "Gone how?" "Resigned. Letter to the county office effective immediate. Word is there's more coming." Boyd settled his weight. "People in town are talking differently about you now." "Are they?" "Mrs. Harlan at the feed store told Pinto you seem like a decent man and she hopes you'll stay." Boyd said this with the deadpan expression of a man reporting weather. "Which coming from Mrs. Harlan is approximately a public apology." Ethan pushed the post down another inch. "I'll send her my regards," he said. "There's also talk that Cassidy's been picked up in Laramie," Boyd said. "Marshal's office out of Denver." Ethan set the post. He picked up the next one. "Good," he said. Boyd nodded once. "Good," he agreed. That night at dinner, the three of them sat at the table the way they'd been doing for weeks, and there was something different in the air. Lighter, less careful. The specific quality of a held breath finally released. Lily talked almost without stopping. About a bird she'd seen near the garden, and what Clara had told her about it, and a book Clara was going to get her from the lending library in Red Creek, about birds specifically, and neither Ethan nor Clara interrupted her, and the conversation went where Lily took it, and it felt like what it was, which was a table with a family at it. After Lily was in bed, Ethan and Clara sat on the porch again. It had become a thing they did without deciding to after dinner, after Lily the porch and the evening dark and the ranch settling around them. Ethan didn't examine it. He'd stopped examining most things that were good. "What happens now?" he said, not with anxiety, just curious. "Penn thinks there'll be formal proceedings about the land transfers," Clara said. "Some families may get their land back. It'll take time." "What about here?" She looked at him. "What about here?" She repeated, but not as a question. More like she was tasting the shape of it. "Cassidy's gone. Alcott's gone. The accusation's gone. He looked out at the dark fields. The reason you had to defend me is gone. The reason I defended you, Clara said slowly, wasn't the accusation. He turned to look at her. She was looking at him steadily, the way she always did when she was saying something she meant. I didn't defend you because I had to, she said. I defended you because you're mine to defend. You and Lily both. The word hung in the evening air. Mine. Not possessive something else. The particular mine of a person who has chosen to put themselves between something they care about and whatever comes at it. Ethan held her gaze. He'd been careful these weeks. Careful with what he let himself feel. Careful with what he let himself want. Careful with the distance he maintained between what this was and what it might become. Because he was not a man who moved fast toward things, not anymore. Not since the February that had rearranged everything in him. But looking at Clara Bennett on the porch of the ranch she'd built alone in the county she'd faced alone with the steadiness in her eyes that he'd been watching for 2 months and still couldn't entirely account for, he thought that being careful wasn't the same as being closed, and that there was a difference between moving slowly and not moving at all. Clara, he said. I know, she said, which was either the most unsatisfying thing she could have said or the most satisfying he couldn't quite tell. It was the kind of thing she said sometimes, those 2 words that collapsed whatever space he was trying to build toward something, with not because she was avoiding it, but because she was already there. I don't know what this is yet, he said. I need you to know that I know that. I know that too, she said, but I'm not. He stopped, tried again. I'm not wanting to find out. That sentence was a disaster grammatically. He knew it the moment it came out. But Clara's expression did the thing it did sometimes, that quick, unguarded thing, the warmth behind the steadiness, that she didn't always let all the way out, and the corner of her mouth moved. Not wanting to, she said. I'm aware that was terrible, he said. It was, she agreed. But I understood it. What did it mean? It meant, you're here, she said, and you're not leaving. And that's enough for tonight. He turned back to the dark fields. That's enough for tonight, he agreed. They sat in silence after that, the easy kind, the kind that doesn't need to be filled, and the ranch was quiet around them. And somewhere in the house, Lily was asleep in her room, with her straight letters and her bird book coming in the mail, and her whole stubborn alive self, and Ethan Walker, who had been carrying everything alone for 5 months, and before that for longer than he'd admitted to himself, sat on the porch of a place that was starting to feel like home, and felt carefully, tentatively, without pressing it too hard, in case it broke something that might be peace. Then Clara said, There's a problem. The quiet shifted. He looked at her. What kind of problem? She set her cup down. Raymond Cassidy may be in Laramie, but the man he was working for isn't. Her voice had gone back to its working register, measured focus, the tone she used when she was moving towards something she didn't like but wouldn't avoid. The land company out of Chicago. The one that bought Hargrove's operation and has been acquiring property across 4 counties. Ethan waited. Their name is Meridian Land and Cattle, Clara said. And they've had their eye on Bennett Ranch for 2 years. He stared at her. They've approached you. Twice. Both times through intermediaries, both times with offers that looked reasonable on the surface and had conditions buried in the paperwork that would have ended the operation within 18 months. She said it steadily. I refused both times. They sent Cassidy. I don't know that for certain. She met his eyes. But I believe it. Cassidy's job was to create instability, accusations, legal complications, enough noise that operations become difficult to run. It's a pressure tactic. If the legal situation around a ranch gets complicated enough, or if the owner's reputation gets damaged enough, or if key personnel leave because the situation is too uncertain, the operation weakens, Ethan said. And then the offer comes again, Clara said, at a lower price. He sat with it. The machine was bigger than he'd thought. Bigger than a man named Cassidy. Bigger than a judge taking meetings. bigger than a false accusation against one ranch hand who'd been in the wrong employment records at the wrong time. "They used me to pressure you," he said. "You were convenient," Clara said. "And I reacted the way they expected a woman running a ranch alone to react, by fighting, by spending resources on defense, by creating attention." She paused. "What they didn't expect was that fighting back would give us information we could use against them. Penn knows about this. I told him in the first letter. He's building a case." She looked at Ethan directly. "But Ethan, Meridian isn't Cassidy. They have real lawyers and real money, and they play a long game. This isn't over because the judge resigned and Cassidy's in custody." "How long a game?" "As long as they need," she said. "Months. Possibly longer." He looked at her. "Are you afraid?" he asked. The same question Lily had asked him. Fair turnabout. Clara considered it in the way she considered everything honestly. "Of losing the ranch," she said. "Yes, a little." "And the rest?" She was quiet a moment. "No," she said. "Not of the fight itself." She paused. "I've been fighting alone for 4 years. That part doesn't frighten me anymore." "You're not alone now," he said. The words came out plain and simple, and without any of the careful architecture he usually put around things like that, and he didn't reach back to qualify them. Clara looked at him. "No," she said. "I'm not." Somewhere in the house, the floorboard in Lily's room made its characteristic creak, the one that meant she'd rolled over in her sleep, which she did twice most nights, with the determined restlessness of a child who was very busy, even unconscious. Ethan heard it, and Clara heard it, and they both held still for a moment, listening, until it was clear she'd settled again. Then Clara picked up her cup. "We'll meet with Penn when he comes next week," she said, back to business, back to the forward motion that was her natural mode. "He'll have a clearer picture of what Meridian can actually do and what our position is. All right? And in the meantime," she paused, "the South herd needs moving. Boyd said the pasture's getting thin." He almost smiled. The South herd. After everything. "I'll get them moved tomorrow," he said. "Good," she said. They sat there a while longer, the two of them, in the quiet that had come back, and was comfortable again, and Ethan thought about long games and land companies, and the particular shape of a fight that doesn't end clean. And he thought that 6 weeks ago he'd arrived at this gate with a sick daughter, and empty hands, and no idea what he was walking into. He thought that what he'd walked into, it turned out, was more complicated and more dangerous and more real than anything he'd imagined standing at that iron gate in the July heat. He also thought, and this was the part he turned over carefully like something fragile, that for the first time in 5 months, complicated and dangerous and real felt like things he could face. Not because the problems were smaller, because he wasn't facing them alone. The wire from Penn's office came 2 days before Penn himself was due to arrive, and it said one thing that changed the temperature of everything. Meridian Land and Cattle had filed a legal challenge to the property boundaries of the Bennett Ranch. They were claiming that the eastern quarter section, the land that held the best pasture, the land the cattle depended on through dry summer, had been improperly recorded at the time of original purchase, and that the actual legal boundary ran considerably further west than the current survey showed. It was not true. Ethan knew it wasn't true before Clara said it, because he'd seen the original survey markers in the ground, and they matched the deed, and because the accusation had the same shape as everything Meridian did. Paper over reality create enough legal noise to obscure what's actual and move fast while the other side is scrambling to respond. But knowing it wasn't true and proving it weren't the same thing. Clara's face when she read the wire was very still. Still in the way that she went, still when she was managing something large, when the feeling was real and strong, and she was deciding where to put it before she let herself act. "The eastern quarter," she said. "The best pasture," Ethan said. "The herd can't winter without it." She set the paper down on the table very precisely, the way you set something down when you're being careful with your hands. "James bought that land. He surveyed it himself. I have the original records. Then we have the records. Meridian has lawyers who are very good at making records look complicated." Her voice was steady. She was not panicking. But underneath the steadiness, There was something taut, something pulled to its limit, and Ethan could hear it. They don't have to win. They just have to slow everything down long enough that I can't get through the winter without selling. He looked at her. She looked back. Something passed between them in that look, not words, just recognition. The recognition of two people who both understand that the ground just shifted and who are deciding in real time what to do about it. "Where are the original survey records?" Ethan asked. "In the study, in the land deed box." "Go get them," he said. "I want to see every piece of paper associated with that eastern quarter." She didn't say, "Do you know what you're looking for?" or "Are you sure?" or any of the reasonable questions a person might ask. She went and got the box and brought it back and set it on the table between them, and they went through it together, page by page, while the lamp burned down and the night got late, and Lily slept upstairs with her straight letters and her coming bird book safe in the house that Meridian Land and Cattle wanted to take. There was something there. Ethan found it at nearly midnight in a page he'd nearly set aside a secondary survey note attached to the original deed signed by the county surveyor in 1887 that explicitly confirmed the eastern boundary marker position and matched it to a geographic feature, a specific creek bend that would be visible on the ground to this day. "This," he said. Clara leaned over to look. He pointed to the survey note, to the description of the creek bend, to the date and the signature. "The boundary's tied to a physical marker," he said. "One that exists. One that's been there since before Meridian was ever a name in this state." He looked at her. "They can argue about paperwork. They can't argue with the creek." Clara read the note, read it again. When she looked up, her eyes were bright, not with tears, with something sharper than that. The particular brightness of a person who has been looking at a wall and has just found the door. "Penn needs this tomorrow," she said. "First thing," Ethan said. "I'll write it tonight." "Clara." He put his hand over hers on the paper just for a second, just the weight of it. "Tomorrow's soon enough. It's late." She looked at his hand. He was very aware that he'd done it without deciding to the way you do things sometimes when the moment is ahead of the thinking. He started to pull his hand back. She turned hers over, not dramatically, just turned it so it was palm up under his. He stilled. "Tomorrow," she said quietly. "Yes." He left his hand where it was. Outside the ranch was dark and quiet and entirely their own. And above them, the Montana sky was doing what it did on clear August nights, that particular depth of dark that makes the stars seem closer than they should be possible to be. And in the house around them was everything that Meridian Land and Cattle was trying to take. They sat there, the two of them, with their hands on the paper that was going to help them fight back. And Ethan Walker thought that the creek bend had been in that ground for 100 years waiting, and that some things hold. Some things hold, no matter what comes at them. Arthur Penn arrived on a Wednesday morning in a hired wagon from Red Creek, carrying a leather satchel that looked like it had survived more courtroom battles than most men twice his age. He was a small, precise man with wire-rimmed spectacles and the particular energy of someone who moved slower than the speed of events around him, because he'd learned long ago that speed and accuracy were not always the same thing. He shook Ethan's hand first, which told Ethan something, and then Clara's. And then he sat at the kitchen table and opened the satchel and got to work. Lily was sent to the garden. She went without argument, which meant she understood the weight of the room, and Ethan watched her go through the window and thought that she was 6 years old and already knew how to read a situation better than men twice her age. Penn spread papers across the table. His handwriting was small and dense, and he annotated as he talked, which Clara matched by pulling relevant documents from the deed box and setting them beside his notes without being asked. They had a rhythm already. Ethan noticed the lawyer and the rancher like they'd done this before, which they had 4 years ago over James Bennett's estate, and the ease of it told him Penn was the right man. "The survey note is significant," Penn said, holding the page Ethan had found at midnight. He read it twice, which meant he was treating it seriously. "Tying the boundary to a physical geographic marker rather than a measured distance is stronger than a standard deed description. It doesn't move. It doesn't get lost in a filing office." "That's what I thought," Ethan said. Penn looked at him over the spectacles. You found this? We found it together, Clara said. Penn looked between them and made a sound that wasn't quite a word but acknowledged something. Meridian's challenge is based on a resurvey they commissioned themselves, Penn said. Their surveyor claims the original markers were placed incorrectly. Their documentation puts the eastern boundary approximately 40 yards west of where your deed says it is. 40 yards, Ethan said. 40 yards takes them the best third of the summer pasture, Clara said. Her voice was level. They know exactly what 40 yards means to this operation. Their surveyor is a man named Aldrich, Penn said. He has done survey work for Meridian in 3 prior land disputes in this state. He has never found a boundary that disagreed with Meridian's preferred position. The table went quiet. He's bought, Ethan said. He's employed, Penn said carefully, which in practice is a distinction without much difference. He set the page down. The question is whether we can establish the Creek Bend reference as definitive. If the physical marker matches the 1887 survey note, Aldrich's resurvey becomes very difficult to sustain. The marker's there, Ethan said. I walked the eastern boundary in my 3rd week here. The creek bends where the survey says it bends. You're certain? I'm certain. Penn looked at Clara. I need an independent surveyor, she said. Someone Meridian can't touch. I have a man in Helena, Penn said. Charles Voss. He's testified in 2 state land cases, and he doesn't work for land companies. He'll be expensive. How expensive? Clara asked. Penn told her. She didn't flinch. Send for him. Penn wrote the name in his notes. Then he took off his spectacles and cleaned them, which Ethan had already learned in one morning meant he was about to say something he didn't want to say. There's something else, Penn said. Clara folded her hands on the table. Meridian has also filed a complaint with the County Agricultural Board claiming mismanagement of grazing land on the Bennett property. They're alleging overgrazing and improper rotation practices that have damaged shared watershed resources. Ethan stared at him. That's a lie, he said. The words came out flat and certain. I restructured the rotation in my 1st week here. The pastures are in better condition now than they were in March. Boyd and Hector can both testify to that. I believe you, Penn said. But the complaint requires a formal response and an inspection, and the inspector assigned to Red Creek County is Thomas Grady's brother-in-law, Clara said quietly. Penn nodded. The shape of it was getting uglier. They're building a file, Ethan said. False accusation against me, false survey, false mismanagement complaint. Each one individually is beatable, but together they create the appearance of a troubled operation with legal complications, Penn said, which makes the ranch difficult to finance, difficult to hire for, and uncomfortable to be associated with. And then Meridian's offer arrives again. Clara stood up from the table. She walked to the window. She stood with her back to them, and Ethan watched her shoulders and the set of her spine and the particular stillness of a person containing something large. Then she turned around. Her face was composed, more than composed, resolved. Tell me everything they can still do, she said to Penn. Every move they have left. I want to know the whole board. Penn told her. It took 40 minutes. Ethan listened to every word and built the shape of it in his mind. The legal mechanisms, the county board procedures, the timeline for each challenge. The points where Meridian's strategy required cooperation from local officials, and the points where it didn't. Penn was thorough, and he didn't soften anything, which was the right call for a client like Clara, who would have noticed softening immediately and trusted the lawyer less for it. When Penn finished, the kitchen was very quiet. All right, Clara said. All right, Penn said. They've been running this play across 4 counties, Clara said. And it's worked every time because the operations they targeted were already weakened drought debt single owners without resources for a sustained fight. She looked at Penn steadily. I'm not weakened. I'm not in debt. And I'm not fighting alone. She looked at Ethan when she said the last part. Ethan held her gaze. What do you need from me? He asked. Your testimony about the grazing rotation, she said. documented, detailed with dates, and Boyd and Hector's as well. You'll have it by tonight. And the creek bend, she said. I need you to walk Voss out to it the day he arrives. Show him exactly what the survey note describes. Done. Penn was writing quickly. There's one more thing, Clara said. She was looking at Penn now, and there was something in her voice that shifted harder, more deliberate, like she'd been building to this, and had decided the moment was right. Margaret Fowler's statement. The one about Cassidy and Alcott's meetings. Does it have implications for Meridian directly? Penn considered. It establishes a pattern of coordination between Meridian-affiliated agents and local officials. It doesn't name Meridian directly, but it opens the door, Ethan said. It opens the door, Penn agreed. If we can connect Cassidy to Meridian's leadership in writing any communication, any payment record, any directive. I know someone who might have that connection, Clara said. Both men looked at her. James had a business associate in Chicago, she said. A man named Robert Hale. He was in freight and land development, the legitimate kind, and he crossed paths with Meridian twice and walked away from both deals because something felt wrong about their accounting. He wrote James about it in 1887. She paused. I kept every letter James received. Penn set down his pen. Mrs. Bennett, he said, and something in his tone was different. The tone of a lawyer who has just been handed something he didn't expect. Do you still have those letters? In the study, she said. In the same box as the deed. Penn breathed out through his nose slowly. I'd like to see them today, he said. I'll get them now, she said, and left the kitchen. Ethan looked at Penn across the table. Penn looked back. She's had these letters for 4 years, Ethan said. She's had them, Penn said. She may not have known what they were worth. She knew, Ethan said. Penn considered him. You may be right, Penn said. She had known. Ethan was certain of it. Certain in the way he was certain about the creek bend, about Boyd's work, about the rotation records, about the 100 small things he'd come to know precisely in the weeks he'd been here. Clara Bennett didn't hold on to things she didn't understand the value of. She'd been waiting for the right moment, the right legal context, the right set of circumstances that would make Robert Hale's letters into something a court could use. She'd been waiting for Penn to tell her the door was open. Now it was open. The letters were 4 pages written in a neat commercial hand, describing 2 separate meetings with Meridian representatives in Chicago, the accounting irregularities. Hale had noticed the pressure he'd been put under to overlook them and his decision to walk away. They were specific names, dates, figures, the kind of detail that a businessman puts in a letter to a trusted friend, because he needs someone outside the situation to know what he saw. Penn read them with the focused stillness of a man reading something that matters. When he finished, he set them down with exactly the same precision Clara used when she was being careful with her hands. I need these, he said. They're yours, Clara said. Copies. The originals stay here. Of course. Ethan watched Penn carefully fold the copies into his satchel and thought about the particular quality of preparation, the way a person who's been holding something in reserve doesn't announce it, doesn't display it, just keeps it until the right time. Clara had carried those letters through 4 years of running the ranch alone, and 2 Meridian approaches, and a false accusation against the man living on her property, and a property boundary challenge, and a mismanagement complaint. She'd carried all of that and kept the letters in the box. He thought he understood her better in that moment than he had in all the weeks previous. Penn left after lunch with his satchel heavier than it arrived, and a list of tasks written in his small, dense hand. And the immediate thing, the thing that settled over the ranch in the afternoon quiet after his wagon disappeared down the road, was that the fight was real now, fully dimensional, and they were in it. Boyd took the news about the mismanagement complaint with a silence that lasted about 4 seconds, and then produced a profanity that Ethan chose not to hear. We've run this rotation better than any I've seen, Boyd said, in 12 years of ranch work. I know that, Ethan said. I'll write it down if that's what's needed. Every date, every move, Every head count. That's exactly what's needed. Hector characteristically said nothing, but nodded in a way that meant the same thing Boyd had said without the profanity. Pinto said he would write something too, and when Ethan said his testimony wasn't required because he hadn't been there for the full rotation period, Pinto said he'd been watching and learning and he could say what he saw, and his voice had a quality Ethan hadn't heard from him before, the quality of someone who has decided to stop being young about something. "Write it down then," Ethan said. "Everything you saw. Dates if you remember them." Pinto nodded, very serious. They wrote that evening, the four of them. Ethan Boyd, Hector in careful block letters, Pinto in handwriting that was more enthusiasm than legibility. At the bunkhouse table with a lamp between them, and Clara came by at 8 o'clock with coffee and read what they'd written without comment and took it with her when she left, and that was that. What happened next came from a direction nobody was watching. Red Creek had a weekly paper. It was 2 pages typeset by a man named George Abel, who had been running it for 15 years, and who by all accounts had the particular editorial philosophy of someone who believes the public's right to know is primarily defined by what George Abel finds interesting. He found the Meridian situation interesting. The issue that appeared the following Thursday had a front-page story about the Bennett Ranch legal challenges, which Ethan read over breakfast with a feeling in his stomach that hadn't decided yet whether it was going to be good or bad. It was both. Abel had done actual reporting. He'd interviewed Margaret Fowler in full detailed named quotes about the Cassidy and Alcott meetings. He'd noted the resignation of Judge Alcott without comment, which was its own comment. He'd described the property boundary challenge and what the Eastern Quarter meant to the operation and to the watershed that other ranches in the area also depended on. And he'd ended with a paragraph that was the newspaper equivalent of a thrown gauntlet, asking by name what Meridian Land and Cattle's business model had done to land ownership across the 4 counties it operated in, and whether the residents of Red Creek County intended to find out before or after they'd lost another ranch to it. Ethan read it twice. Clara read it once faster. "Abel did this himself?" Ethan asked. "He does things himself when he decides they matter," Clara said. "He decided." "Is this good for us?" "It's very good for us," she said. "And it will make Meridian angry, which means they'll move faster, which means they'll make mistakes." "You wanted them angry." She looked at him. "I wanted them off balance," she said. Angry and off balance are usually the same thing. He thought about the letters she'd kept for 4 years. "How long have you been planning this?" he asked. The question hung between them for a moment. "Since the second time their representative came with an offer," she said. "Since I understood what they were doing across the county and realized that fighting them one ranch at a time wasn't going to work." She paused. "I just didn't have everything I needed." "Until now." "Until now," she said. He was quiet. "You took me in," he said slowly, "because of what you needed." Her eyes came to his immediately sharp. "No," she said. "I took you in because of Lily, and because of what I saw in your face when you'd carried her 3 days, and because the house was empty, and I was tired of it being empty." Her voice was absolutely certain. "What's happening with Meridian is separate from that. But having me here, having you here helped," she said. "The testimony, the rotation records, the creek bend." She held his gaze. "But I would have taken you both in if Meridian had never existed. Don't mistake the timing for the reason." He looked at her. She looked back. He believed her. He believed her for the same reason he'd believed everything she'd said to him from the beginning, because she didn't qualify things she meant, and she didn't say things she didn't mean. And in 6 weeks, he'd learned to read the difference clearly. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. The Meridian response came on Monday. Not legal, not paperwork. A man. His name, they learned later, was Crane. He came alone, riding a good horse dressed better than the situation warranted, and he asked at the gate for Clara Bennett with the particular confidence of someone who has decided the outcome of a meeting before he's had it. Ethan was at the gate before Clara reached the door. He didn't know why he moved first instinct or something close to it. He'd been in the barn when Pinto came running, and he'd come fast, and he arrived at the gate with his hat on, and his hands loose at his sides, and the very specific quality of stillness that big men carry when they're not trying to be big about something. Crane looked at him. "I'm here to see Miss Bennett," Crane said. "She's aware," Ethan said. "What's your business?" "My business is with Miss Bennett." "Then you'll state it to me first," Ethan said. "And she'll decide if she wants to hear it again herself." Crane's jaw moved. He was the kind of man who expected to be let through gates, and the novelty of not being let through was doing something to his expression. "I represent Meridian Land and Cattle," he said. "I know who you represent." "Then you know this is a business matter, and I know you've filed 3 separate legal actions against this property in the past 2 weeks," Ethan said. "I know your company's surveyor has a history of findings that happen to match Meridian's preferred boundaries. And I know that your last 2 representatives in this county have had very different endings to their time here than they expected." He held Crane's eyes. "So whatever you've come to say, you'll say it with me standing here." Crane stared at him. Then Clara's voice came from behind Ethan, clear and completely unmoved. "Mr. Crane, I'll hear your offer." Ethan stepped to the side. Not back to the side, parallel. Crane dismounted. He came to the gate, which Ethan did not open, and spoke through the iron. Meridian's offer was 30% below market value for the full Bennett Ranch property. The terms included a 60-day closing window assumption of all legal costs currently accrued, and this was the part that arrived with the most careful packaging: a 5-year employment contract for Ethan Walker in Meridian's Montana operations. The silence after he finished had weight. Ethan felt something move through him that wasn't quite rage. Rage was hot, and this was cold. The very cold, specific feeling of being offered something as a pressure point. The offer to him wasn't generosity, it was a wedge. Divide the man from the woman, give him something to gain from her loss. Clara didn't look at Ethan. She didn't need to. "No," she said. Just that. One word. Crane had clearly expected negotiation. He'd come with a number and a counteroffer prepared, and the single syllable, without any space for response, appeared to genuinely confuse him. "Miss Bennett," he said. "The legal costs alone will be resolved in my favor," she said, "with costs awarded to me." That's an optimistic reading of "Mr. Crane." Her voice was very quiet. "I have a letter written by a man named Robert Hale in 1887, describing in specific detail 2 meetings with Meridian representatives and the accounting practices he witnessed. I have it. My lawyer has copies. The Federal Land Office in Helena now also has copies because I sent them last week." She paused. "I want you to go back to whoever sent you and tell them that." Crane went very still. It was the stillness of a man who has arrived at a situation and suddenly understands he has been given incorrect information about what kind of situation it is. "The offer," he said, "is still." "The answer is still no," Clara said. "And it will be no next time, and the time after that. This ranch belonged to my husband, and before that to his father, and I have run it alone for 4 years, and I intend to run it for 40 more. She looked at Crane with an expression that had no heat in it, and no coldness either, just absolute solidity. "If Meridian has further legal business with me, they can send it through Arthur Penn's office in Helena. Good day." She turned and walked back to the house. Crane stood at the gate. Ethan stayed where he was until Crane got back on his horse. He didn't say anything else. There wasn't anything to say. Clara had said it. Crane rode out. Pinto, who had been watching from the corner of the barn, appeared at Ethan's shoulder. "That was something," Pinto said quietly. "Yeah," Ethan said. "Miss Bennett doesn't—" Pinto searched for the word. "She doesn't back down much, does she?" "No," Ethan said. "She doesn't." He went inside. Clara was at the kitchen table with pen and paper, already writing to Penn. She didn't look up when Ethan came in. "He'll report back that I mentioned the letters," she said. "I know. That'll accelerate things." What does acceleration look like? She kept writing. It means they try something we haven't seen yet. Something that doesn't go through the normal channels. She glanced up briefly, which means we need to be ready for things that don't look like legal filings. He sat down across from her. What kind of things? She set down the pen. For a moment she looked like she was deciding how much to say. 2 years ago, she said, there was a rancher named Pedersen about 15 miles north of here. He'd been fighting Meridian's approach to his east boundary for 8 months. His barn caught fire in October. She said it steadily, like a person reporting a fact they've been holding in memory for 2 years. The investigation found an accidental cause. Lantern, they said. Ethan was very still. Pedersen sold in November, Clara said, at Meridian's price. The cold was back. Different from before. Specific. You think they'd go that far? He said. I think they've gone that far before, she said. I think Pedersen's fire was not an accident. I think nobody was ever going to prove it was anything else. And I think that now that they know we have the Hale letters, and now that George Abel has put their name in the newspaper, and now that we've refused them twice with a lawyer who's sending things to the federal land office. She held his gaze. I think they're going to decide that the risk calculation has changed. The ranch. The barn where Boyd and Hector and Pinto worked every day. The cottage where Ethan slept. The house where Clara had lived alone for 4 years and was no longer alone. Where Lily slept. Something moved through Ethan Walker that was not cold at all. Clara, he said. I know, she said. We need to. I know, she said again. I'm already thinking. She picked up the pen, set it down again, looked at him directly. Ethan, what I said to Crane about 40 more years, I meant that. This ranch is not going to Meridian. I don't care what it takes. I know, he said. But I need you to understand what that might mean, she said. What we might be walking into. It's not just lawyers and filings anymore. He held her gaze. I understood that when I stayed after Grady came, he said. I understood it when you showed me Penn's wire. I understood it when you pulled those letters out and gave him the copies. He paused. I understood it the night we sat at this table and went through the deed box together. She looked at him. You could take Lily, she said quietly. Somewhere safe, somewhere away from this, while... No, he said. The word came out with no room around it. Ethan, no. He leaned forward. I'm not going anywhere, and Lily is not going anywhere. This is her home. You made it her home, and I'm not going to undo that because someone is trying to frighten us off land they want. His voice was absolutely level. We stay. We fight. That's what we do. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, one of the horses called out and was answered. Clara looked at him for a long moment with that expression he'd come to know, the one that was open in ways she didn't always intend, the one that showed the thing underneath the steadiness. James would have liked you, she said. It wasn't what he expected her to say. He wasn't sure how to hold it, so he held it carefully. He sounds like a man worth being liked by, Ethan said. Something moved across Clara's face. Not grief exactly, something more complicated than grief. The thing grief becomes when you've had 4 years to live alongside it, and it has stopped being sharp and become instead a part of the general shape of you. He was, she said simply, a beat. Then she picked up the pen. I'm going to write to Margaret Fowler tonight as well, she said. She needs to know that we told Crane about the letters. She needs to be prepared for the possibility that someone might try to discourage her from testifying. Is she safe? Margaret Fowler, Clara said with something in her voice that was close to affection, has been feeding this town information about itself for 30 years and has never once been persuaded to be quiet about anything. I think she can manage a land company. She paused. But she should know. Write to her, Ethan said. She wrote. He stayed at the table, not because there was work for him to do there, but because the house felt like the right place to be. Because Lily was upstairs asleep, and Clara was writing letters at the kitchen table, and the lamp was burning low, and someone needed to sit in the middle of those two things and hold them both. He had become He realized the person who sat in the middle and held things. That was new. It was not a bad thing to be. He was still sitting there an hour later when Clara finished the last letter and looked up and found him across the table and said with genuine curiosity, "Why are you still here?" "Seemed like the right place to be," he said. She looked at him, then she looked down at her letters and stacked them neatly and said, "I'm going to make tea. Do you want some?" "Yes," he said. She made tea. They sat with it at the kitchen table in the late quiet of the Montana night, and neither of them said much, and neither of them needed to. And outside the ranch was still and dark and entirely theirs. And somewhere to the south, in an office in Chicago, or a hotel room in Laramie, or wherever, Meridian Land and Cattle ran its decisions from. Something was being decided about what came next. Let it come, Ethan thought. Let it come. He looked at Clara's hands around her cup, steady and certain, and at the lamplight on the table between them, and at the closed door above which his daughter slept, and he felt the particular quality of readiness that isn't about the absence of fear, but about the presence of something that matters enough to fight for. He had never in his life felt more ready for anything. What he didn't know, what neither of them knew, sitting in that kitchen with their tea and their letters and their solid certain sense of what they were fighting for, was that Meridian had already made its decision. And it wasn't a legal filing. 2 nights later, at 2:30 in the morning, Ethan woke to the smell of smoke. He was on his feet before he was fully awake. That was the thing about smoke. It doesn't wait for you to decide what to do about it. It moves through walls and under doors and into lungs, and the body responds before the mind has caught up, and Ethan Walker was across the cottage floor and out the door in the time it took him to draw 2 breaths and understand what he was smelling. The barn was on fire. Not the main house. The barn, the big one, the one that held 12 horses and the hay stores and the equipment that ran the operation. The east wall was already going when he came out, orange light cutting through the dark in the way fire does when it has found something it likes and made a decision to stay. He was running before he thought the word run. "Boyd." His voice came out at full volume without effort. "Hector. Get up, fire." He hit the barn doors at speed and got them open, and the heat came out at him like a wall, and he went in anyway because the horses were screaming. That sound, horses in a fire, was something a person heard once and carried for the rest of their life. High and wild and wrong in a way that bypassed every considered response and went straight to the part of a person that moved before thinking. He got to the first stall. The mare, the one with the patient dark eyes, was against the back wall whites, showing weight shifting. He got the stall door open and got his hand on her neck and talked to her low and fast, the specific nonsense words that work, because of the voice, not the meaning. And she let him lead her out, and he passed her to Boyd, who had appeared at the door, and went back in. Hector was already inside, moving to the far end. Pinto appeared in his door, took one look, and went in after Hector. 4 horses, 5 horses, the heat climbing with every trip. Ethan's eyes were streaming. The east wall was fully engaged now, and the fire was looking at the roof with the interested expression that meant the roof had minutes, not more. 6th horse. 7th. "Ethan." Boyd's voice from outside, not panicked. Boyd didn't panic, but with something different in it. 2 still inside, but the roof. He was already going back in. The smoke was lower now and thicker, and he dropped below it because that was what you did, and found the stall by feel and got the horse out a young gelding that was past fear and into pure blind flight and nearly took Ethan down before he got him through the door. 1 left. He went back in one more time, and the heat was the kind of heat that changed the quality of air, and his lungs were telling him things he was choosing not to hear. And he got to the last stall. Old Hector's horse, 17 years old, a bay with a Roman nose, who under any other circumstances would have walked calmly through a hurricane, and the horse was down. Not hurt, just down. Terror had folded him. "Up," Ethan said. "Come on, get up." He got his hands under the horse's neck, pulled, talked. The smoke was in his throat and his chest, and the roof above him was making sounds he didn't like. "Up, come on, let's go." The horse got a leg under himself. Then another. Ethan got him by the halter and moved, and the horse moved with him, and they came out of the barn into the night air as the roof made a final decisive sound, and one section of it came down behind them in a shower of sparks that scattered across the yard like something celebratory in a nightmare. Ethan stood in the yard and coughed until he couldn't stand straight, and then stood straight anyway. All 12 horses. He counted. All 12 were in the yard, contained by Boyd and Hector and Pinto, some tied to the fence posts, some held, all of them trembling and alive. He turned. Clara was there. She'd come from the house at a run, he could tell by the state of her hair, loose coat thrown over her nightclothes boots, not properly laced. She was standing 10 feet away, and she was looking at him with an expression he'd never seen on her before, and couldn't fully read in the firelight. She crossed the distance in 3 strides and put both hands on his face, just held his face, both hands palms against his jaw, checking for something. Her eyes moved fast, his face, his arms, his chest, his face again. "You're all right," she said. It wasn't quite a question. "I'm all right," he said. She breathed out. She didn't step back. Her hands were still on his face, which he was aware of with a clarity that had nothing to do with the fire or the smoke or the 12 horses trembling in the yard. Then she seemed to realize it at the same moment he did, and she stepped back, and her expression shifted back into the working register. "The horses?" she asked. "All out." Her eyes went to the barn. One wall still standing. The rest in various stages of collapse, the hay stores gone. The equipment, some of it, not all they'd gotten. Some things out in the chaos, Boyd had thought of it, and Ethan hadn't gone. "Lily," Ethan said suddenly. "She's in the house," Clara said immediately. "I checked before I came out. She slept through it. She's still asleep." Something in his chest unknotted. "Good," he said. "Good." Boyd came up beside them. He was dirty, and his eyebrows were shorter than they'd been 3 hours ago, which was the kind of detail that arrived in the brain during crisis and stayed. "It started on the east wall," Boyd said. "Middle section. I've seen barn fires from old hay, from lanterns knocked over from lightning. This didn't start that way." "Where exactly?" Ethan asked. "On the outside of the wall," Boyd said. "The char pattern on what's left of it." Ethan looked at the remains of the east wall. Clara looked at the same thing. Neither of them said the word meridian. They didn't have to. "We need someone here tonight," Ethan said. He was looking around the yard, doing a fast read of what they had and where the vulnerabilities were. The main house, the cottage, the south barn, in case they're not done. "I'll take the main house," Boyd said without being asked. "Hector?" "South barn," Hector said. He was already moving. "Pinto." "I'll stay with the horses," Pinto said. He was pale under the dirt and the firelight, and he was 19 years old, and he didn't sound like 19. He sounded like a man who has just understood something about the world and has decided what to do about it. "Nobody's getting to them again." Ethan looked at him. "Good man," he said. Then he turned to Clara. "I'm staying on the porch," he said. "Front of the house, all night." She didn't argue. "There's a rifle in the study," she said. "Second drawer." "I know where it is." She looked at him. Something moved in her eyes. "Be careful," she said. Not dramatically, just the plain words said the way you say them when you mean them. "Always," he said. She went inside. He got the rifle and sat on the porch of the Bennett Ranch in the August dark with the smell of smoke still in his hair, and the 12 horses still shifting in the yard, and all the lights of the operation he was responsible for spread out in front of him, and he watched, and nothing else came out of the dark that night. But the fire had done its work regardless. The barn was gone. The hay stores were gone. Several pieces of equipment that would need to be replaced before winter were gone. The cost of all of it, rebuilding, restocking, replacing, was the kind of number that a ranch running comfortably could absorb over time, and a ranch running tightly could not. Clara knew the number by morning. She'd been in the study since before dawn, by the look of the lamp going through the operations accounts, the way she went through everything methodically, without sentiment, taking the full measure of the damage before she decided what to say about it. Ethan came inside when the sun was up properly and Lily was beginning to stir upstairs, and Clara was at the study desk with a page of figures in front of her and the expression of a woman who has found the number and is deciding how to carry it. "How bad?" he asked. She told him. He sat down. It was bad. Not unsurvivable. She had reserves. The operation was profitable. Penn's legal work was moving in the right direction, but tight enough that Meridian's timing was not accidental. They had watched the operation long enough to know when a blow of this size would hurt the most. "We can rebuild the barn," Ethan said. "Boyd and Hector and we can get the structure up in 3 weeks with the right lumber. Local sourcing, not ordering from—" "I know," Clara said. "I've been pricing it." "The hay stores." "Pedersen north of here lost his storage too early in the summer. He has surplus he'll sell at fair price. Margaret Fowler told me last week he'd been looking for a buyer." He stopped. She had been thinking about contingencies before the fire. Or not exactly before, but she had been holding the information in the way she held everything useful in case it was needed. Pedersen, who had sold to Meridian under pressure, who had his own reasons to want Meridian's method exposed, was sitting on hay she could buy. "You were already thinking about this," he said. "I was thinking about worst cases," she said. "This qualified." "Clara." She looked up. "You didn't sleep," he said. "No." "You need to sleep." "After we've talked to Penn," she said. "I'm sending him a wire this morning." He almost said something about the order of priorities. He didn't, because he knew her well enough to know the wire to Penn was the thing that would allow her to sleep. And making her sleep before the wire was sent was like trying to get a river to flow uphill. "What are you telling him?" he asked. "Everything," she said. "The fire, the origin point, the char pattern." Boyd described Pedersen's fire in comparison. She looked at him directly. "If we can establish a pattern of property destruction connected to Meridian's acquisition attempts, Penn thinks we can take this to the federal level. Not just the land office, the marshals." Ethan was quiet. The scope of it was getting larger again, expanding out past the Bennett Ranch, past Red Creek, past the personal accusation and the property boundary and the mismanagement complaint into something that had been happening across 4 counties, to families who didn't have Penn and Helena, and letters from Robert Hale and a survey note tying their boundary to a creek. "Pedersen," he said. "Pedersen," she agreed. "And there are 2 other families I know of. The Harmon place, which sold 18 months ago under circumstances that didn't sit right with anyone who knew them. And the Ruiz family in the south part of the county who sold last spring. I've been thinking about reaching out to both. For their stories. For their testimony," she said. "If they'll give it." He looked at her. She had been building this case. Not just reacting to Meridian's moves, building something that went back further and pushed further forward than what was immediately in front of them. The Hale letters, the Fowler statement, the survey note, the rotation records. And now this, the pattern of fires, the pattern of families who sold at Meridian's price after something went wrong on their property. She had been building a weapon. She had been building it with everything she had patiently, the same way she ran the ranch. Knowing what she needed. Knowing where each piece went, not hurrying the parts that couldn't be hurried and moving fast on the ones that could. "You've been planning this since before I got here," he said. "I've been preparing since the second offer," she said. "When I understood what they were, planning requires more pieces than I had alone." She held his gaze. "Now I have them," she said. There it was. Not calculating. He didn't read it as calculating. And he was a man who had learned to read the difference in people between someone who uses and someone who needs. She had needed what he brought, the testimony, the rotation records, the physical presence that meant she wasn't an isolated woman on an isolated property. The simple fact of someone else in the fight who couldn't be made to leave by pressuring her. She'd needed him. That was different from using him. He understood the difference. "All right," he said. "Tell me what you need from me for the Pedersen and Harmon and Ruiz outreach." She told him. The wire to Penn went out that morning. Voss, the independent surveyor from Helena, arrived 2 days later, a quiet, methodical man who reminded Ethan of Penn in the way he moved through information, except where Penn worked in documents. Voss worked in ground, and where Penn annotated, Voss sketched, and both of them had the same quality of someone who had been doing their work long enough to be interested in truth rather than outcome. Ethan walked him out to the eastern boundary. The creek bend was exactly where the 1887 survey note said it was. Voss stood at the bend for a long time. He measured. He noted. He looked at the Meridian surveyor's alternative claim Ethan had Penn's copy of it, and looked at the ground again and said in the flat declarative tone of a man reporting something obvious, "This boundary is not ambiguous. The marker is a permanent geographic feature. Their survey has the bend approximately 42 yards west of its actual position." 42, Ethan said. 42.3, Voss said. Which suggests someone measured from the wrong reference point. He paused. Or chose to. Can you put that in writing? Ethan said. That's why I'm here, Voss said. He put it in writing that evening. Penn got the wire that night and wrote back before morning with 2 words. This holds. Ethan read those 2 words at the kitchen table and felt something settle in his chest like a foundation stone going into place. Then Lily came downstairs for breakfast and saw his face and said, "Good news. Good news," he said. She sat down and reached across the table and patted his hand with great maternal authority. "I knew it would be fine," she said. He looked at her. "You keep saying that," he said. "Because it keeps being true," she said with the logic of a 6-year-old who has not yet learned to be surprised by her own rightness. He almost laughed. Then Clara came in from the study with the morning's correspondence and looked at the 2 of them and read the table correctly and said, "Voss's report." "Penn says it holds," Ethan said. Something moved through Clara's expression, a fraction of released pressure, the kind you can only see in someone's face if you know how to look at them. "Good," she said. She sat down. "I heard from the Ruiz family yesterday," she said. "By letter, Maria Ruiz. She said her husband would speak to a lawyer if we could bring one to them. She said—" Clara stopped, set the letter down. "She said they've been afraid to say anything for a year. She said they thought nobody would believe them over a Chicago land company." She looked up. "She said she's glad someone's fighting." Ethan said nothing. There was nothing to add to that. The knock at the front door came that afternoon, and it wasn't Crane, and it wasn't Grady. It was George Abel. The newspaper man was smaller in person than Ethan had imagined from the writing thin in his 50s, with ink permanently lodged in the creases of his hands, and the look of a man who had seen a great deal and found most of it interesting. He took off his hat at the door and said to Clara, "I've had a letter from Chicago." Clara stepped aside to let him in. He sat at the kitchen table. Everyone ended up at the kitchen table Ethan had noticed, which said something about what Clara's kitchen was, and he set the letter in front of her. Ethan read it over her shoulder. Meridian's lawyers had written to the Red Creek Courier. They described Abel's recent coverage as defamatory, as harmful to legitimate commercial enterprise, and as potentially actionable under applicable press law. The language was formal and precise, and very clearly designed to frighten a small-town paper into silence. Abel watched Clara read it. "They want me to retract," he said, "or print a correction that is in practical terms a retraction." "Will you?" Clara asked. "I'm here, aren't I?" he said. Clara looked at him. "I've been putting news in that paper for 15 years, Abel said. "I've covered drought and disease and a county commissioner who was stealing road funds, and I have never printed a correction that wasn't true." He said it without drama, just as fact. "I printed what Margaret Fowler said because she said it. I printed what the county records showed because the records showed it. If Meridian's lawyers want to argue with the county records, they are welcome to try." "It could get difficult for you," Clara said. "It got difficult for the Harmon family," Abel said. "It got difficult for the Ruizes. It got difficult for Pedersen." He folded his hands on the table. "I'd like to do something about that if you'll let me." Clara was quiet for a moment. "What are you proposing?" she asked. "I'm proposing a full series," Abel said. "Every family, every property, every questionable transfer. Names, dates documented. Whatever Penn and your lawyer work will allow, that doesn't compromise the legal case. He looked at Clara steadily. Meridian can write threatening letters to one small paper. It's harder to write them to the Helena Independent and the Bozeman Gazette and the Associated Press wire service, which is where a series like this would go. Ethan heard the shift in the room. This was no longer a property dispute. This was becoming something that couldn't be managed by paperwork and legal pressure and the occasional fire in the night. "Clara," he said quietly. She looked at him. He looked back. She made the decision in that look he watched her make. It saw the moment of it pass through her face. "Talk to Penn first," she said to Abel. "Everything goes through Penn. If he says a piece of information can be published without compromising what we're building legally, you have my blessing and everything I know." Abel nodded. "Fair. And Mr. Abel." She met his eyes. "Be careful. The Peterson fire didn't happen because of a paper, but it happened because someone felt cornered. If this series comes out, my wife's been after me to install a better lock on the press room door," Abel said. "I expect I'll get around to it." He left with Penn's address in his coat pocket. The afternoon that followed was quiet in the way that precedes things, the specific quality of a ranch settling into its evening routine when everyone on it is aware that the routine is not the whole story and is choosing together to do the routine anyway, because that's what keeps the cattle fed and the horses watered and the ground ready for whatever morning brings. Ethan was at the South Barn when Boyd found him at dusk. Boyd's expression was the one Ethan had learned to read. The one where something is on his mind, and he's decided to say it and is working up the exact right number of words, which for Boyd was never many. "You should know," Boyd said, "that Hector and Pinto and I have talked." Ethan waited. "We've all had other work offered," Boyd said. "Since the fire. Word got around fast. 2 ranches sent word asking if we were still employed here or looking." Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. "Boyd." "We're not going," Boyd said. "That's what I came to tell you. We talked about it, and we're not going." He paused. "Hector said if we leave now, we're doing their work for them. Pinto said—" A flicker of something crossed Boyd's face, not quite amusement, but adjacent. Pinto gave a fairly long speech. The substance of it was similar. Ethan looked at him. "Thank you," he said. "Don't?" Boyd said exactly the way Clara said don't when he thanked her for things she considered obvious. "Just tell Miss Bennett." He went back to whatever he'd been doing. Ethan told Clara at dinner. She absorbed it the way she absorbed good news briefly without performance, with a quality of receiving it fully rather than displaying a response to it. "I'll talk to them in the morning," she said. "About wages." "Clara, you don't." "I do," she said. "They're choosing to stay in a situation with real risk because it's the right thing, and because they trust this operation. That's worth more than standard wages, and I'm going to pay accordingly." He didn't argue. Lily, who had been eating with her customary focus, looked up. "Boyd stayed," she said. "Boyd stayed," Clara said. Lily nodded seriously. "I like Boyd," she said. "He taught me how to whistle." Ethan looked at her. "When did he teach you how to whistle?" "Last week," she said. "While you were fixing the fence." She demonstrated a small piercing sound that was actually quite good for a 6-year-old and looked enormously pleased with herself. Clara looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at Clara. The moment held the two of them over Lily's head in the kitchen of a ranch that someone had tried to burn down with a lawsuit and a surveyor's report, and a newspaper editor, and 3 loyal hands and a 6-year-old who could whistle. And something passed between them that was large enough to need no words, and small enough to fit in the space between 2 people at a kitchen table. Then Lily whistled again louder. "Lily?" Ethan said. "At the table," Clara said simultaneously. They looked at each other. Lily looked between them with the satisfied expression of a child who has achieved a desired effect. The wire from Penn arrived the next morning, and it was not what any of them expected. Penn had moved faster than his usual pace, which meant he had found something that required moving fast. He'd been in correspondence with the Federal Land Office in Helena and with a contact at the U.S. Marshal's office, and what he had found was this Raymond Cassidy, who was in custody in Laramie, had agreed to cooperate with federal investigators. He was providing a full account of Meridian land and cattle's operations across 5 states, including the names of the officials they had paid, the surveyors they had employed, the methods they had used to pressure resistant landowners, and the individuals in the company's Chicago office who had authorized each operation. He was, in Penn's careful language, providing everything in exchange for what was not specified, but the implication was clear enough. "He's trading," Ethan said. "He's trading everything he has," Clara said. She was reading the wire again, slower. "Penn says the federal case against Meridian's leadership is moving. He says our documents, the Hale letters, the Fowler statement, Voss's survey report, the fire evidence are being included in the federal filing." Ethan was quiet. "How long?" he asked. "Months," Clara said. "Federal cases don't move fast." "But it's moving. It's moving." She set the wire down. "It won't stop them from trying things in the meantime, but their room to maneuver is getting smaller." He thought about the people at Meridian's Chicago office who had been told by Crane that Clara Bennett had the Hale letters and had sent them to the Federal Land Office. He thought about what it meant to be a company that has been operating in shadow and to learn all at once that the shadow is significantly smaller than you thought. "They'll push harder before they back off," he said. "Yes," Clara said. "Which is why—" The sound from upstairs was small, just Lily's footsteps crossing her room, but both of them heard it, and both of them looked up. Clara folded the wire carefully and put it in the deed box. "Which is why," she continued, her voice lower, "Penn is coming back at the end of the week, with a federal marshal." Ethan stared at her. "Penn arranged a meeting," she said. "The marshal wants to speak to us directly. He wants the original Hale letters, original survey documents, and original deed. He wants statements from Boyd and Hector and Pinto. He wants everything in person." "He's building a federal case from here," Ethan said. "He's building a federal case," Clara said. "And he wants to do it properly, which means—" "It means this is almost over," Ethan said. Clara looked at him. "Almost," she said. "Not yet." Lily appeared at the kitchen doorway in her nightgown hair, loose, carrying the book Clara had gotten her from the library, with the focused, sleepy air of a child who has decided morning has arrived regardless of what the clock says. "There's a bird outside my window," she announced. "A new one. Can we look it up?" Clara looked at the book in Lily's hands. Then she looked at Ethan. "After breakfast," Clara said. "Can I have the pie for breakfast?" Lily asked. "No," said Clara and Ethan together. Lily considered this. "Both of you said the same thing," she observed. "We agree on certain things," Ethan said. "Most things," Clara said. Lily looked between them with those gray eyes that didn't miss anything, and whatever she read in what she saw made her smile small, certain the smile that reminded Ethan so much of Ruth that it used to make him turn away. But today, standing in Clara's kitchen in the August morning with the federal marshal coming at the end of the week, and the creek bend still in the ground and all 12 horses alive, and a barn, they were going to rebuild together. He held his daughter's smile and let it land exactly where it was meant to. "Okay," Lily said. "Regular breakfast." She sat down. Clara started breakfast. Ethan sat across from his daughter and watched Clara at the stove, and thought about creek bends and things that hold, and the particular quality of a morning that arrives after a night you weren't sure you'd get through, and how the ordinary acts of breakfast and a child's question about a bird and a woman at a stove can contain sometimes everything, just everything. Penn arrived Friday afternoon with a man named Calloway. Marshal Daniel Calloway was nothing like what Ethan had imagined when Clara said the word marshal. He was 50-something, lean, with a face that had been weathered into an expression of permanent mild interest, and eyes that moved through a room the way experienced men's eyes move taking inventory without announcing it. He shook hands with Ethan first, then Clara, then crouched down and shook hands with Lily, who had appeared in the kitchen doorway with her bird book and the expression of someone who intends to be included in whatever is happening. "Miss Lily," Calloway said. "I know who you are," Lily said. "You're the marshal. Clara said you were coming. She told you about me. She said you were going to help fix things," Lily said. "Are you—" Calloway looked up at Clara. Clara had the expression she sometimes got when Lily said something that landed too precisely the expression of a woman trying not to let it show how much it cost her. "That's the intention," Calloway said to Lily. Lily nodded satisfied and went back upstairs with her book. Calloway watched her go. "Sharp child," he said. "Yes," Clara said. "Sit down. I'll get the deed box." What followed was 4 hours of the most focused work Ethan had been part of since arriving at the Bennett Ranch. Calloway went through everything. The Hale letters, Voss's survey report, the rotation documentation, Boyd and Hector and Pinto's written statements, Margaret Fowler's account, the char pattern description from the barn fire, Penn's correspondence, the wire from the Denver Marshal's office. He read every page. He asked questions that were short and exact, and went to the center of things without traveling through the outside first. He asked Ethan about his history with Hargrove's operation, about the timing of his departure, about Raymond Cassidy's name appearing in the accusation. He asked without skepticism and without excessive sympathy, just the questions, just the facts, just what happened and when. Then he asked Clara something that shifted the room. "Mrs. Bennett." He set down the Hale letters and looked at her directly. "When did you first believe Meridian was responsible for the fire at Pedersen's barn?" Clara didn't hesitate. "The week after it happened," she said, "when Pedersen told me where the fire started. Same wall, same origin pattern as ours." "You didn't report that belief at the time." "To whom?" she said. "Judge Alcott was taking meetings with Cassidy. Sheriff Grady had already shown me where his instincts ran when he came here about Ethan. There was no one in this county I trusted with that information." She held Calloway's gaze. "So I kept it." "And the Hale letters. Same reason." Calloway was quiet for a moment. "You've been building this case yourself," he said. "For 2 years." "I've been surviving," Clara said. "And keeping records. Sometimes those are the same thing." Calloway looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Ethan. "And you've been here how long?" 9 weeks, Ethan said. 9 weeks, Calloway repeated. He looked back at the table full of documents. A significant amount happened in 9 weeks. "Things were already in motion," Clara said. "Ethan helped me move faster. And they moved against you faster as a result." "Yes." Calloway nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "Here's where things stand. Cassidy is cooperating fully. He has named the 2 individuals in Meridian's Chicago office who authorized what he calls the pressure operations his term. He has provided payment records correspondence and the names of the surveyor, the former county officials, and 1 other individual in this state who received payments for services." He paused. "One of those names is Aldrich." "The surveyor," Ethan said. "The surveyor," Calloway confirmed, "which combined with Voss's independent report gives us the property boundary matter resolved in your favor before it reaches a hearing." He looked at Clara. "The mismanagement complaint has already been withdrawn. That happened 2 days ago. We requested it as a condition of one of our conversations with Meridian's legal team, and they complied, which tells you how the wind is reading in Chicago right now." Clara's hands were still on the table. "The fire," she said. "The fire is being investigated as deliberate destruction of property," Calloway said. "Cassidy has stated that the authorization came from the same Chicago office. He doesn't know who physically said it. That investigation is ongoing." He paused. "I want to be honest with you, Mrs. Bennett. We may not find the individual, but the authorization chain is documented, and that matters for the federal case." "What happens to Meridian?" Ethan asked. Calloway looked at him. "The federal case is moving against the 2 principals in Chicago," he said. "This will take time. Federal prosecutions are not fast, but the documents you and Mrs. Bennett have assembled, combined with Cassidy's cooperation and the Denver Marshal's findings, are the foundation of that case." He said it plainly, without decoration. "What you've done here matters. It will matter in a courtroom." Penn, who had been quiet through most of the last hour, added, "The other families, Pedersen, the Harmons, the Ruizes, have all agreed to provide formal statements. Margaret Fowler's account is now part of the official federal record. George Abel's series begins publication next week in the Helena Independent." "Abel placed it," Clara said. It wasn't a question. "Helena Independent and the Bozeman Gazette simultaneously," Penn said. "The Associated Press has expressed interest." The table was quiet. Ethan thought about the night he'd spent on the porch with the rifle, the barn going down, the 12 horses in the yard, Clara's hands on his face in the firelight, checking if he was hurt. He thought about the road from Colorado, 3 days on foot, Lily's weight against his chest, and her ragged breathing, and the particular despair of a man who can see what he needs and cannot get there fast enough. He thought about an iron gate and a woman who opened it. "What do we need to do now?" he asked Calloway. "Nothing urgent," Calloway said. "The federal machinery is running. Penn will keep you informed of developments as they come." He began gathering his notes. "You should rebuild your barn, run your cattle, live your lives." He glanced up briefly. "That's not nothing, Mr. Walker. Continuing to operate a successful, well-documented ranch while Meridian faces federal scrutiny is itself a form of testimony." "We'll operate it," Ethan said. Calloway looked at him, then at Clara, then at the deed box that held everything they'd built together, the documents, the letters, the evidence that 4 years of preparation and 9 weeks of fighting had produced. "I believe you will," he said. He left with Penn at dusk, and the sound of their wagon fading down the road was the particular sound of a chapter closing, and Ethan stood at the gate and listened to it go, and felt the weight of 9 weeks settling around him like something physical, like a coat taken off after a long, cold journey. Boyd appeared beside him. "They gone," Boyd said. "They're gone." Boyd made the sound he made when something significant had been adequately dealt with, which was no sound at all, but a quality of quiet that communicated satisfaction. "I've got a lumber estimate for the barn," he said. "How much?" Boyd told him. "I'll talk to Clara tonight," Ethan said. "I figured," Boyd said, and went back to the horses. Dinner that night was different from the dinners that had preceded it. Not celebratory exactly. None of them were people who celebrated before the thing was finished, and the thing was not finished. Would not be finished for months while the federal case ran its course. But the particular tension of the past weeks had shifted into something else. Something that had more air in it, more room. Lily ate with her usual focused speed and talked about a letter she wanted to write to Maria Ruiz's daughter, who was apparently her own age, because Clara had mentioned the Ruiz family in passing, and Lily had absorbed this information and decided with her characteristic directness that a girl her own age in a difficult situation was someone who should receive a letter. "Can I?" she asked Clara. "Of course," Clara said. "We'll work on it tomorrow." "I want to tell her the marshal came," Lily said. "I want to tell her it's going to be okay." Clara looked at her. "It is going to be okay," Lily said with the same certainty she'd had about everything from the beginning. "So she should know." "We'll write it tomorrow," Clara said. "Clara." Lily nodded and finished eating and asked to be excused, and went upstairs, and her footsteps crossed her room, and then went quiet, and the kitchen was just the two of them. Ethan looked at the table, the lamp, the deed box on the shelf where Clara had put it after Calloway left. "Boyd has a lumber estimate," he said. "I know," she said. "He gave it to me this afternoon." "And we can do it," she said. "Tight, but we can do it. And Pedersen's hay will see the herd through winter." She turned her coffee cup in her hands. "The barn will be better than the one we lost. Boyd has ideas about the east wall. He told me." They sat with it, the practical reality of what came next, the specific work of rebuilding the forward motion that was simply what you did when the acute crisis had passed and the chronic work of life resumed. Calloway said to live our lives, Ethan said. He did. I've been thinking about what that means, he said. Clara was quiet listening. When I came here, he said, I didn't have a life to live. I had a situation to survive. There's a difference. He looked at her. I wasn't looking for anything except a job and a safe place for Lily. I know, Clara said. But something happened, he said. In 9 weeks. Something I didn't plan for and didn't expect and don't quite have the right words for yet. She held his gaze. I have the words, she said. I've had them for a while. I've just been waiting for the right time. He waited. Clara set her cup down. I love you, she said, and I love Lily, and this is my home, and I want it to be yours, not a foreman's cottage on the east side of the property. She said it plainly, the way she said everything she meant. Here, this house, this table, every morning and every night. She didn't look away. That's what I want. I'm telling you, because you deserve to know, and because life is short and uncertain. And I watched someone I loved die over 11 days, and I am not going to spend time. I have not saying the things that are true. The lamp was burning low between them. Outside the ranch was dark and quiet, and entirely theirs. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, at the woman who had opened a gate and taken in a desperate man and his sick daughter, and fought a land company, and kept letters for 4 years, and put her hands on his face in the firelight, and made tea at midnight, and told a 6-year-old, I promise, without flinching. Clara, he said, you don't have to say anything tonight, she said, and her voice was steady, but he could hear underneath it the thing it cost her to say, that the willingness to give him room, even when she didn't want to give him room, because she was that kind of person. I'm not going to wait, he said. She stilled. I walked 3 days on a road that was going nowhere, he said, and ended up exactly where I was supposed to be. I don't think that's nothing. I don't think that's accident. He leaned forward slightly. I love you. I've known it for weeks, and I've been careful with it the way I'm careful with things that matter, but I'm done being careful about this. He held her eyes. I'm not leaving. I'm not going back to the cottage. I'm not going anywhere that isn't beside you. The kitchen was very still. Then Clara breathed out a long, slow breath, the breath of a person putting down something heavy they've been carrying without admitting it. And the steadiness in her face opened into something else, something fuller, something that had been waiting behind the walls for 4 years and was finally fully done, waiting. Okay, she said. It was the same word Lily used. One word certain, complete. He reached across the table. She took his hand. They sat that way for a while at the kitchen table in the lamplight with the deed box on the shelf, and Lily asleep upstairs, and 12 horses safe in the yard, and a barn to rebuild, and a federal case moving in Chicago. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was the specific fullness of a life that has been broken and rebuilt into something truer than what it was before. The barn went up in 3 weeks. Boyd had ideas about the east wall, as he'd said, and those ideas turned out to be good ones. A double-layer construction that was more resistant to the kind of pressure that had brought the original down. Ethan and Boyd and Hector and Pinto built it together, and Clara brought lunch out every day. And on the last day when the final board went up, Boyd said absolutely nothing for a long moment, and then said, better, which from Boyd was a standing ovation. Lily wrote her letter to Maria Ruiz's daughter. Clara helped her with the spelling and with the shape of what to say, but the substance was entirely Lily's, direct and warm, and completely certain that things were going to be all right, because they were, and someone should say so. 3 weeks later, a letter came back. Lily read it at the kitchen table with her lips moving slightly, which she did when reading something important, and when she finished, she looked up at Clara. Her name is Elena, Lily said. She likes horses. Does she? Clara said. She said thank you for the letter. She said nobody from outside her family had written to her in a long time. Lily looked at the letter again. She said it helped. Clara said nothing. but she reached across and put her hand over Lily's for a moment just briefly, and Lily let her. That was its own kind of answer. George Abel's series ran for 4 consecutive weeks. The Helena Independent ran it. The Bozeman Gazette ran it. The Associated Press Wire picked it up after the second installment, and from there it went. Places none of them had anticipated papers in Denver and Chicago eventually, as far as New York, where a reporter at a large daily wrote a follow-up piece about Meridian Land and cattle's operations in the western states that named the 2 Chicago principals by name, and detailed what the federal case alleged. 2 weeks after the New York piece, both men resigned their positions at Meridian. Penn sent a wire that read, simply, "They're running." Clara read it at the breakfast table and handed it to Ethan and stood up and went to the window and stood there with her back to him for just a moment before she turned around. Her eyes were bright. "The Harmons," she said. "Their land. Penn said there's a possibility of reversal if the original transfer can be challenged as part of the federal case. He told me," Ethan said. "He thinks it's viable. I want to help with that," Clara said. "Whatever it takes. Testimony documentation, I want to help." "I know," he said. "He knows. He's already planning on it." She sat back down. Lily looked between them. "Is it over?" she asked. Ethan and Clara looked at each other. "The worst of it," Clara said carefully. "But not all of it," Lily said. "Not all of it," Clara said. "Some things take a long time to be fully over. But the part where we were afraid," she paused. "That part is over." Lily considered this. "Good," she said, "because I don't like that part." "None of us do," Ethan said. "Boyd said a bad thing only stays bad as long as you let it stop you," Lily announced. "He said you have to keep working." Ethan looked toward the window. "Boyd said that," he said. "Yesterday, while I was watching him fix the hinge on the south gate." She was matter-of-fact about it. "He talks more when he's fixing things." Clara made a sound that was very close to a laugh. "That may be the most useful thing Boyd has ever said," she told Lily. "I wrote it down," Lily said. "In my letter book." She had started a letter book, a small notebook Clara had given her for correspondence, which had expanded to include things she wanted to remember. Ethan had seen it once briefly when Lily had left it on the kitchen table. Her entries were written in the straight, careful letters that no longer leaned, and they contained without apparent organizing principle observations about birds and things. Adults said that seemed important, and questions about weather. And one entry that read simply, Clara said, "I promise," and she meant it. He had closed the book and put it back where she'd left it and not said anything about it to anyone. The morning of the first frost, Ethan asked Clara to walk the eastern boundary with him. She came without asking why. That was one of the things about her she trusted the reason would become clear, and she was almost always right. They walked the fence line in the cold, early air breath, visible the ground beginning to firm underfoot with the first edge of autumn. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. The ranch was doing what it did in the changing season, shifting, settling, preparing, and walking its boundaries was its own kind of conversation. When they reached the creek bend, Ethan stopped. The creek moved the way it always moved, certain unhurried, following the shape the land had made for it over a very long time. The bend was exactly where it had always been. 42.3 yards east of where Meridian Surveyor had claimed. Immovable. Inarguable. There. Clara stood beside him. "This is what held," he said. She looked at the creek. "It was always going to hold," she said. "They can move paper. They can't move water." He looked at her. She was watching the creek with the expression she had sometimes when she was seeing something that connected to something else, something larger than what was directly in front of her. "James picked this land because of this bend," she said. "He said a ranch built around permanent water was a ranch built on truth. Everything else could be argued. The water was just true." Ethan was quiet. "He was right," he said. She looked at him. He looked back. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Then ask it," she said. "Marry me," he said. "Not as an arrangement. not as a practical matter. Because I love you, and because Lily loves you, and because this is where we belong, and I want it to be permanent and true the way this creek bend is true." He held her gaze. "Marry me, Clara." The creek moved. The air was cold and clean and smelled of frost and coming autumn. Clara looked at him for a long moment, the full, unguarded look she sometimes gave him. Now the one that didn't have the walls up, that showed the whole of her. "Yes," she said. One word. The same certainty, the same completeness she brought to everything she meant. He took her hand. They stood at the creek bend together on land that was theirs, on ground that had held against everything sent against it in the particular stillness of a morning that knows it is the first of something long and good. They were married in October. It was not a large wedding. It did not need to be. Penn came from Helena. Margaret Fowler came from Red Creek and brought her husband and cried in the way of a woman who has seen enough of the hard version of things to be genuinely moved by the right version. George Abel came and shook Ethan's hand and said, "Good story," which was the highest thing he knew how to say. Pedersen came with his wife and stood very straight in his best coat and looked like a man who had found in the gathering of these particular people something he'd needed. The Ruiz family came, all of them, Maria and her husband and Elena, who was Lily's age, and who Lily immediately took by the hand and walked around the entire property explaining everything in the focused proprietary way of a child sharing something she is proud of. Boyd stood beside Ethan. He had not been asked to. He had simply positioned himself there the morning of the wedding and stood there with the expression of a man performing a function he has decided is his to perform. And Ethan had looked at him and said nothing, and Boyd had said nothing. And that was that. Hector and Pinto stood together near the south fence and were very tidy and uncomfortable in their best clothes and looked, Ethan thought, like exactly what they were. Good men who had stayed when staying was hard, who had helped build a barn and hold a line and write down the truth in careful letters when it was needed. Lily stood with Clara. She had decided, in the way she decided things, that her position was beside Clara, and she held Clara's hand through the whole of the short ceremony with the focused gravity of a 6-year-old who understands that something important is happening and intends to be present for all of it. When it was over, when the words were said and the thing was done, Lily looked up at Clara. "Now you're really my family," she said. Clara crouched down to her level. "I was already your family," she said. "Now it's just official." Lily thought about this. "I like official," she said. "Me too," Clara said. She stood. She looked at Ethan. He looked at her. Behind them, Pedersen's wife was talking to Margaret Fowler, and Penn was telling Abel something legal that Abel was writing down, and Elena Ruiz was learning from Lily exactly how to whistle the way Boyd had taught her, and the ranch was doing what it did, standing, continuing, being itself around all of it. "Well," Clara said. "Well," Ethan said. She smiled. He thought about the gate, the iron gate, and the July heat, and Lily's weight against his side, and the woman who had come down the porch steps with the unhurried walk of someone who owned the ground. He thought about what he had been, then empty-handed and desperate, and moving towards something without knowing what it was. He knew now. It was this. It had always been this. 3 people who had each in their own way run out of road and found each other at the exact moment the road ended and built something from that meeting that was stronger than what any of them had lost. The Bennett Ranch stood, the creek bend held, and Ethan Walker, who had carried his daughter 3 days through the Montana dust with nothing left in him but the will to keep moving, put his arm around the woman who had become his wife and looked at his daughter, teaching a new friend to whistle